You know what's cool about this too? I've made a point of putting that videographers should watch this too, because I think learning how to layer your images and tell stories that way is like, that's beneficial to everybody.
All right. So before we get going, since we have a minute left, thoughts on Jim's cheesesteaks. That's what I want.
Oh, I totally thought you were going to say thoughts on TikTok.
No. Welcome to the Wedding Crashers Podcast. Awesome. So, hey, why don't we start out with, we'll just talk about the topic here. So we're gonna be talking about creating deeper documentary style images, right?
Yeah.
Is that
hopefully?
All right, cool. So Chuck, why don't you tell us your background, how you got started, and a little bit about your approach?
Yeah. Kind of none of this was ever supposed to happen. None of this was ever part of like a big plan. I never, sat back and said, I'm going to do photography for 17 years and eventually end up on the Wedding Crashers podcast. Never part of the plan. Photography was not something that I had ever really considered. So the way I kind of fell into it was in 2002, we had a pretty major life event that happened. We ended up taking custody of my nephew at the time. He was 5 months old. And I kind of did what I felt at the time. I became literally like a father figure over a weekend. And I kind of did what I thought that parents should do. You should document the growth of your kids as they get older. That's what my family had done. My dad was the person who took photos of us growing up, and I have shoeboxes of photographs, and I cherish them. So I kind of just dove in and picked up a camera. My wife was my girlfriend at the time. She bought me my very first DSLR in 2004. It was the original Canon Rebel back in the day.
Nice.
And when I say like I literally didn't know what aperture was or shutter speed, like that's not an exaggeration. I had no idea. All I knew is that I wanted to do this, and I liked it. I picked up the camera and I just kind of had a really good feel for it. My images were horrible, but it made me feel really good. So that was kind of all I needed to get started. Is I just really enjoyed taking photos. And then, like anything else that you really like, you want to get better at it, right? So I dove in. I remember the book that I bought was Understanding Exposure by Brian Peterson. I still recommend it to this day. It's an amazing book for anybody looking to learn manual photography. Started shooting manual, and one thing, this was all sort of pre-Facebook, pre-YouTube, so there was a lot of self-discovery, a lot of self-exploration, and a lot of really, really bad images. And I think I look back at it, I'm kind of proud of now, is that I was kind of obsessive about it, and I worked at it very, very regularly. I mean, practically every day. And it was something I just really needed to do. I just really wanted to do this. I really needed to do this. And I think through that process, slowly images started to get better, and I started to understand a lot more about photography. And so that's essentially what caused me to pick up the camera. I didn't really, I can honestly, in looking back to, I said, I'm proud of that process, but I probably went about 4 or 5 years without making like one truly good image. At the time I thought I was making a good image every time I pressed the shutter, right? But I think that looking back, it took me a while to really get to my first image that I considered really good. So yeah, and that image still hangs kind of prominently in my house. It's like one of my prized possessions that I have, actually. So that was kind of the process that I went through to pick up the camera.
When you got that first image, did you know like immediately, like, oh, I got it, like this is real?
I did, and it's I really did, and it's really cool. I actually have like goosebumps talking about that right now, because it's awesome. Such a cool story for me. I love it.
Would you mind sharing?
Yeah. Sweet. I think it might be hanging. I think it's hanging in the other room.
Yeah, just the story is fine. The story.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the story. Yeah, for sure. So 2008, I ended up buying a film Leica. I like history. I was a history teacher, as we talked about, and I like history. I like the background of things. I like understanding where we came from. So right around that time, I started studying photographers that I thought were good. And I discovered that they were all using this camera that I hadn't heard of. It was called a Leica. So the only way I could afford one at the time was to buy a film Leica. Well, the only problem was I didn't know a damn thing about film. So, but I liked the idea of a Leica. So I was like, okay, well, if all of these great photographers use Leica, I'm going to try it too. And so I was using a film camera at the time. And I remember, like, at that time, I really had started studying documentary photography. One of the first books that kind of swayed me in that direction was, and I couldn't afford it. So I would go to Barnes and Noble and I would like look through it and then put it back on the shelf. But it was Annie Leibovitz's A Photographer's Life. So Annie Leibovitz's background, you know, she's known for her huge dramatic portraits, but she was a photojournalist for you know, had that in with the Beatles or I'm sorry, with the Rolling Stones and all that amazing work that she did in San Francisco. So I was studying that, and it kind of nudged me in this direction of documentary photography. And I remember it was my oldest son, who's 15 now. He was like 3. Yeah, right. Yeah, 3 years old. And my wife in the pool in Ocean City, New Jersey. And I was shooting this scene. I remember it was just like, I remember thinking to myself, like, man, this is boring. This is boring. I have shot this shot so many times before. So I like looked around, and we were staying at like a cheap hotel that had like a balcony with the pool. And I ended up saying, I wonder if I got up there, what it would look like. And I remember looking through the viewfinder. And I think that the whole idea of it being a film camera really helped me, because I had to really slow down, and I only had a certain amount of exposure. So I couldn't just rapid fire. I had to really think about what I wanted in my image. So I remember looking through the viewfinder and arranging it in such a way that I wanted. And I remember when I clicked the shutter, if you've ever used a Leica, there's no blackout, right? You're looking straight through the viewfinder. So I remember, like, when I clicked it, I was like, yes, this is great. This is exactly what I had in mind. So for the first time ever, and I, like I said, I had shot practically every day. For the first time ever, I had made an image with intent. And that was like a groundbreaking moment for me. So you know, that whole what's crazy about that whole process is I take that whole process that I went through to make that image. There's still parts of that with me in my process today. So I mean, it was a turning point for me. So that's why it's such an important image for me. And you know, that image I would have in my portfolio today. I took the shot in 2008. And, you know, I would still proudly put that in my portfolio today.
That's so awesome. That's such a great story. It's pretty amazing. Now, when you say take an image with intent, I feel like it's something like, it sounds weird. I don't know that I've ever done that. You know, like intent to, like, I can think, I'm like, oh, did I do something I intentionally shot that way? Okay, I did it. You know, I saw this shot, so I kind of want to duplicate it in my own way. So I did it this way. When I saw like something where I was like, oh, I'll put this in the foreground, this in the background. Can you describe a little bit what you mean by like a shot with intent?
Yeah, so I think that's a great conversation, and there's a lot of different ways to go with this. So I think when I think about the origins of intent, it brings me back to a talk I heard from a Pixar animator, and he talks about the 4 stages of being creative, and we'll all relate to this. So if you've heard it before, I'm sorry if I'm repeating it, but the 4 stages. So the first stage is unconscious failure, right? We get a camera and we have absolutely no clue what we're doing. We pick it up and all of our pictures are dark and we have no idea why, or all of our pictures are overexposed and we have no idea why. So it's unconscious failure. So the next step is conscious failure, right? So we say, oh, my pictures are all dark, but I know why. It's because I'm shooting at 1/8,000th of a second at f/22. I need to let more light in the camera, right? So it's conscious failure, right? And then we start to have some success, but we don't understand why. It's unconscious success, right? So we have unconscious success. That's probably the stage where I was when I made that image of my son, unconscious success. And that's a fun stage to be in, because things are happening for us and we understand, like, hey, we're making some pretty good images, but we don't quite understand why. And then the final stage, the 4th stage, is conscious success. It's when we know we know exactly what we want to do, and we have the aptitude and ability to do it, right? Nice. So I think those 4 stages kind of go to intent. Like, you know, intentional, like for me now, intent, like I try to make images that are timeless and nostalgic. Those are at my core, authentic. I know those are words that a lot of people use, but those are at my core. So for me, there are certain processes I go through to get to a place where I am making timeless images on purpose. Like, I'm not accidentally clicking the shutter and saying, yes, I got a timeless image. I am intentionally trying to make timeless imagery, intentionally trying to make an instantly nostalgic image. So, intent kind of encapsulates all that. And I think it can only come when you get to a stage where you are consciously successful, right? Like, where you're in that fourth stage of creativity. You can do it accidentally up to that. But when you get to a point where, you have a really good handle on what your photographic voice is and your photographic abilities, and when they merge, you can start making images with intent.
That's
Nice.
really awesome. You know what? I bring that back to, I took Werner Herzog's masterclass on filmmaking. And one of his big things that he drives home over and over and over is to remember that even though we have cameras that can record forever, we're not garbage collectors, he calls it. Like, we're shooting, just like you said, like with intent, only shooting things that further our story, not that we have to capture everything. It's like, and I think that's really cool. I think you actually explain it way better, like, than what, his little saying about we're not garbage collectors is. And I love that.
Yeah. And Michael, I think one of the challenges with that is, so we're at a wedding, right? And there's so much awesome stuff happening everywhere. One of the challenges working with intent is when you work with intent, right? When you're working with something super specific that you're looking for, right? That means if you're shooting for this much, that means you're excluding a whole bunch of stuff. And that makes a lot of people really uncomfortable, right? Because we're expected to be there. We're expected to capture it all, right? But if that's not at our core as a photographer, then we end up just capturing, in that teacher's words, garbage. We end up just capturing a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't look like my photography, or it doesn't look like your photography, right? So I think that's a great point. And, one of the challenges of working with intent is that we have to make a really hard choice sometimes to exclude a whole bunch of stuff that's pretty cool, right? Like, so we're making this choice to say, nope, I only want this here. I'm going to exclude all of this other stuff. That's hard, right? Like, like some people say it's ballsy, or, but if you really look at the photographers that you admire, that we admire, right? We look at the photographers we really look up to. A lot of times I look at not just the content of what they shot, right? I look at an amazing image, let's say, photographer like Trent Park. He has an extremely unique voice. He's a Magnum photographer. If you're not familiar with it, you're going to look at his work and you might like it or you might not. What I like to look at is it's so unique. I try to look at it in the context of, when I'm looking at the image, wow, what choices did he have to make to get to this image? What didn't he photograph to get to this image?
Right.
That's crazy, right? Like, I mean, if you want to look at photographers with really strong voice, look at their images in that context, and it'll really flip you out, So yeah, so I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but.
Absolutely. We Mike and I and Ted have all taken Ray Roman. He's a filmmaker's class, and like a couple of things he showed in his class was like, having a lens that's capable of like reaching in and stuff like that. One of the things he showed in the one shot, this was a class like 7 years ago now that I'm looking at it. He like got in real close to get like the ring actually going on the finger, right? And I'm like, all right, well, how do you do that without missing the whole thing or missing something big? Or what if it doesn't look good from where you're at? Like, how do you go in for that creative shot, or that, to document that specific emotion? There's crazy choices. But actually some of the work we're going to look at of yours, I thought that exact thing. I said, man, how did he get that? Like, what does he not shoot this part? Does he not shoot it? Like, my mind started going of like, all right, well, how did this work? And you got some cool explanations for that kind of stuff. So I'm excited to get into that.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah, super cool. Hey, so just before we get into, and I guess we can talk about it when we're looking at the photos. It's up to you, but the documentary style or photojournalistic style of photography, and correct me if I'm wrong, like when I look at it, I see it as, there's a lot more in focus. Like there's images you'll show with like layers of depth where like everything's in focus. So there's a specific approach, I guess, that I'm asking of like how you shoot on the technical side that I think would be good to kind of like set this up before we get into the intent behind each photo. Is that something you can talk about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned layers, Tommy. So maybe I know I shared with you some contact sheets. So well, I guess maybe we'll get to them in a second, but I guess maybe kind of explain how we get there, and then we can kind of maybe talk through them. So, you're 100% right. So one of the things that I learned early on about documentary photography, and if you look at documentary photography, and forget wedding photographers for a second, I mean, I'm talking about true photo documentary work, photographers like Alex Webb and Paolo Pellegrin and Christopher Anderson, and I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head, but some of my favorites. I'm surrounded by a bunch of books, but Robert Frank and Walker Evans, some of the godfathers of documentary photography. There's not a whole lot of shallow depth of field. Most of their work is really stopped down. The only time it's not stopped down is if they're limited by light, right? So, in studying all that, I noticed that a lot of photographers are really stopped down. So one of the takeaways I took from studying them is applying that to my own photography, is stopping down a lot. So, I really don't try to shoot wide open all that often, unless I have to. I really try to start at like f4 or f5.6. If I'm outside, I like f8 a lot. And what that does is it allows, like you said, more depth of field, because I am often looking for a layered scene. So when I take a look at a complex scene, or a scene where there's a lot of different, elements into it, I try to approach it like we write sentences. So if you think about when we first started to write a sentence back in first grade, your teacher told you need two things. You need a noun and a verb, right? And that's all you need to make a sentence, right? So, they might put up on the board, the dog runs, right? Perfect. You have a noun, you have a verb, you have a sentence, right? So when I'm working through a documentary scene, I'm thinking about that. I'm identifying my subject, and I'm making sure there's something happening. There's a sentence there, right? So what that might sound like in a bride getting ready scene is, the bride applies makeup, right? So it's noun and verb, simple, right? So then, for me, we could take that image anytime. That's a boring image, just like it's a boring sentence, right? What does the bride look like? Who else was in the room? Are there any adjectives? Was it funny? Was it sad? Was it emotional? So I start looking for modifiers. I start looking for things that I can modify that with. And, I think when we hear the word layers, I think a lot of times we as photographers think, oh, I layer stuff all the time. And they put shit in front of the camera and they shoot past it, and magic, I just have a layered image, right? So what I try to do is I try to make sure that everything in the frame has context. Everything in the frame has a purpose, right? Because anytime that we put something in the frame, we're creating a relationship, right? So if you have a bride putting makeup on and you just shoot through a plant toward the bride, what's the relationship between that plant and the bride? There's no relation. There's none, right? It's completely gratuitous and it's completely extraneous, right? So, what I try to do is, is mom around watching? So like now we have a story, right? We have a completion, we have a circle. The mom looking back at her little girl who used to play makeup when she was 8 years old, or something like that, right? So now we have a lot more to it. So you add emotion, you add different elements, and depth of field really helps with that. So yeah, I feel like another big part of layers too, and this kind of stems from a quote, another great documentary photographer, his name's Lee Friedlander. It's kind of on the forefront in the 60s of like a lot of documentary and street work. He has this great quote where he talks about making an image. And he says that when he relates it to juggling balls. He says, when you're 12, you might be able to juggle 2 balls. And when you're 50, you might be able to juggle 5. The trick for me is trying to put as much into a photo and make it all pull together, right? And I think what he means by that is putting a bunch of stuff in the frame, and the key part is making it all pull together. That's the challenge of it all, right? So that kind of leads to the idea of inclusions and exclusions, right? We all get the same exact rectangle to work with. We have this rectangle we look through, and it's up to us to decide what we're putting in the frame and what we're leaving out of the frame. So that's on the forefront of my mind all the time, as in terms of what I'm putting in the frame and what I'm leaving out of the frame.
That's so funny you said that shit about the plant. That's why I was laughing, because I've definitely done that. And you're like, yo,
I've done
what
it.
what does that have to do with anything?
Nothing. It
And
has nothing to do.
I wouldn't have thought about how does that relate to the actual image until you said it, which is dumb as shit. I don't know why I wouldn't have, but it's so funny.
But sometimes it's an aesthetic. Like, I'm working with, I have a year-long mentorship, and I have 12 students that are in that. And one of the things that I'm working on with one of the students is a little bit of abstract stuff. And I personally really don't like putting stuff in front of the frame, but there is a purpose for it sometimes. As long as that goes back to intent, right? As long as we understand what the intent of it is, then you're good. If you're doing it gratuitously, and I think that's going to show through in your photography, and you're going to have an unauthentic image or an unauthentic style,
Sure.
or inauthentic, I think. So as long as you understand why you're doing it, have at it. I would never, ever look down on somebody who does that. I do it from time because I know why I'm doing it. It's like, oh, I'm putting this here to block the makeup artist, right? Mm-hmm. Like, well, I have a purpose for that, right? So, no, totally.
That kind of, in a way, hey, that kind of goes back to our talks of pizza and cheesesteaks, right? Just because you can add a ton of stuff to it doesn't mean it's going to make it any better.
Right. Absolutely. And it's such a good point. So, think about it, Mike, when you juggle 2 balls, it's a little bit easy to do, right? When you start juggling 5, it's challenging. And that's a really good point. It's a fine line to add too much to the frame. And Tommy, when we look at that example that we're going to talk about with the contact sheet with all the images, I'll show you where I did try to put a whole bunch of stuff in a frame, and I failed miserably. We're all going to see it. You're all going to see my failure.
Awesome.
Your failure is probably still one of our portfolio.
No. You'll see. Trust me. It's bad.
Hey, I have a question that we should talk about before we jump into the photos. And it's because it's something that I thought was huge when we talked before this. And that's the actual definition of how you see documentary wedding photographers or photographers in general. Because we all assume it means you don't talk at all to the clients, you don't direct at all. And when I was talking to you, it seems like that's actually not the right assumption. There's more to it. And I think that would really help a lot of people if you talked a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I think first things first, I try to take bits and pieces from, I like to read. I like to read about documentary photography. I like to read about that process. And I've been doing that for, a long time. So I read about, not just look at the images that my favorite photographers take, but also read about them and their process. I get more out of that. And I try to take bits and pieces. And I really think that one of the biggest misconceptions about documentary photographers, and again, not even talking about wedding photography, is that they go in the room and they don't say anything. They are, I love this phrase, flies on the wall, right? I think that is completely untrue. Most documentary photographers will oftentimes spend a long time with their subjects before they ever pick up the camera, talking to them, understanding where they live, interviewing them, discussing, what the project's going to be about, things along that line. Very, very rarely can you get into, because if you look at some really amazing documentary photography, this person didn't just show up in a random room and sit in the corner, right? I always felt like, being in the corner of a room and not talking is uncomfortable, right? Now, I'm not gonna. It's gonna make everyone uncomfortable. Like, oh my God, that guy hasn't said a word, and he's so close to me, and he keeps clicking the shutter, right? Like, you have to kind of build trust. Now, I think one of the big markers of true documentary work is not directing, right? That I do agree with. You can see Paolo Pellegrin, who's one of my favorite photographers. There's a controversy of him where he posted an image. It's an environmental portrait of a story he was working on, and he claimed it to be something that it wasn't. And the subject took umbrage with it. The subject kind of called him out on it. So there was this controversy, right? But so they're directing. The moment you start directing, you can't say that your image is true documentary, right? And as somebody who really values history and respects documentary photography, I am not going to say we in the lead up to this, when we were talking about some images, I flat out said that image there is not 100% documentary. This image is, right? So, I think that's really important to talk about. Like, it's important, if you are going to claim that it is documentary, that it should be unposed and unscripted, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't be talking to the subjects in the room, right? I'm a human in the room who was invited to be there. So I think it's really important to understand that and, kind of know where the line is, right? Like, yeah, I'm a human in the room, but I'm also not a groomsman or a bridesmaid, right? Like, I am the photographer and I do have a job to do, but to sort of break the ice and make everyone feel comfortable, I don't think being a fly on the wall is in anyone's best interest.
So I wanted to say something about that. I totally get what you're saying, and it makes me think about like a regular documentary, like a movie. It's something you see on the History Channel or something. Like, from everything I've seen from those directors and people that write those, they become very close with the subjects in that.
Absolutely.
They can really understand the whole story, because sometimes maybe there's a question that they might ask to clarify an issue that they're having, or trying to understand the motives behind an action. And that would go to tell the story, because then they're like, oh, okay, I know what to film next because you just explained that to me. So maybe not the same thing on a wedding day, but the idea of having a good relationship with that person. I know you're going to talk a little bit about building trust today too with people. I think that matters a lot when it comes to photojournalism.
Yeah, Ted, I think that's spot on. And I think that one of the most underrated things that we have on us are our ears. So when we're in the room, listening to things that are being said, you could pick up a lot when you're listening. You could be shooting and listening at the same time. There's a lot you can hear, about, dad's nervous right now that he's going to see his little girl. But that's a clue, right? It's a clue, like that that moment means a lot to him, right? So it's like, okay, moment when daddy sees little girl, that's an important moment. So I have that stored up. So I'm gathering information. As wedding photographers, we don't have the advantage of, like you said, Ted, interviewing people and meeting with people ahead of time. Oftentimes we're meeting these people for the very first time. We've done some pre-wedding consultations, but we haven't been in their physical presence a lot of times. We show up, we shoot the wedding. So it has to happen kind of quick, that trust building. But absolutely, talking and joking. When I walk into a room, a lot of times my camera's down, and it's, hey, how are you today? Everything okay? Awesome. Hey, Mom, congratulations. What a day. I can't, it's amazing. I must go by in a blink of an eye. I'm going to be there soon too. I have 3 sons of my own. Building that rapport, it happens quickly. But I think it's, walking into a room and not saying anything, I think would be really difficult to get really close, intimate documentary images.
Yeah, I think that's something you see too. Like,
Hey, Ted, by the way, you're getting yelled at in the group. People are saying they can't hear you because you're too far from your mic.
Oh, I thought you guys said you could hear me fine.
We could before, but they're
audio
saying
101
it here.
I'm glad you interrupted me, because I actually forgot what I was going to say.
I saw the struggle.
Thanks, man. Sometimes my brain don't work so good.
I'm not a smart man, Jenny.
Oh,
sorry. Here we go.
Forrest. Nope, I lost it again. No.
We were talking
able
about quick
to.
rapport,
I got it.
Quick.
It came back. Quick before I forget again. No, it's so there's something that I feel like a lot of people claim to do, me being one of them, and it's like, oh, I really capture your love story, or I'm able to capture, what something unique to you guys, like your unique day, your unique experience. And I don't know how you would do that without talking to them or getting to know them. And that was something I was gonna say, like, some of these images seem to tell a really good story. And I don't know if it's stuff you just picked up on the day, or do you talk to them at all in advance about that type of stuff? Not just, client expectations and things like that, but like about their story, how they met, any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, a little bit. My wedding questionnaire has some questions that, what's important to you? Like, I think that one of the things that is sort of built into, and it's part of what I like to shoot. It's part of what I show. It's part of my core. It's part of my voice, I think, is that I do tend to take a much less bride and groom centric stance than a lot of the work that I see. A lot of work that I see features prominently the bride and groom all the time, right? And so as a part of that, I think a lot of my clients come to me recognizing that and understanding that family is really important to me, and documenting family is really important to me. It's where my core is, right? It's what I started doing before I ever shot a wedding image. So I think that is naturally part of it. So, and then I kind of, I guess, subliminally drive that point home a little bit on my questionnaire, where I do talk about special relationships, special people to be photographed. And it just gives me, like Ted talked about, a little bit of an interview feel, where I kind of in the back of my mind know that their relationship with dad is super important. So I kind of look for that,
Right.
Yeah. And I pick up on parts of the day too. There's an image, I think, that I kind of shared earlier about an impromptu first dance where, there was the sister told me about how important grandmom was to her. So I positioned myself accordingly to make sure that I included grandmom in their first dance. So I pick up on things like that, and I try to learn, learning as we go. I try to learn as much as I can, as quickly as I can, and try to incorporate that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like that bride and groom centric approach is something you see a lot. It's definitely something that I've, thought about in the past and had doubts about, because I go like, after a wedding, I go, wait, man, it was doubts I had over saying, like, I don't shoot cocktail hour, I don't shoot grip and grins, I don't shoot stuff like that for some reason. I don't know where that started. And then I said, like, well, those people are invited, they're important. Is that something I should be doing more of? Is there a better way to capture that stuff and get out of my head as a photographer and look at, as a couple, what, those people are important to them. They, it's a hard decision. I remember making the list for my wedding, cutting people out and stuff like that. And that shit was hard. So the people that are there are clearly very special if they made it to that day. It's an important thing.
Yeah. One of the things I talk to my clients about is to not necessarily look at me like the wedding photographer, but to look at me as like a cousin who happens to take pretty good pictures. So, and that's the kind of approach that I take is kind of try to, from a perspective of a family member, right? As someone who's part of the family. And when you do that, that event, a wedding day, becomes much more than just a bride and groom. It becomes a family event. It becomes two large families coming together. And, the opportunities are endless for great imagery when you take that approach, because a great image can come a lot of times without the bride and groom anywhere nearby. And I think if we're not looking for that, we're shortchanging our clients, and we're shortchanging ourselves in a way. Right. But because I think what clients want to see, at least my clients want to see, I think they want to see all the stuff they didn't see. Right. Mm-hmm. So, I think that I try to make meaningful photographs of the people who were invited, because weddings aren't cheap. Right. So those people who they chose to make the cut do matter. So I really try to focus on making strong images of the people who are invited.
That's so awesome. Hey, we do have one question, and I don't know if you want to get to it yet or if we'll do it for later, but I'll just ask it real quick. And someone is asking, how much time do you spend with the couple before the wedding? Or do you get to know the couple as much as possible on the day of the wedding? Like, what's your pre-consultation look like?
Yeah, it's up to you, Mike. I mean, if you want to we can do the Q&As after, or do you want to dive into the layer stuff with the images?
All right. Let's dive into the photo stuff, and I'll farm all these comments and questions, and then we'll go.
That's a good question.
In the Q&A. That is a good question, though, right? Because it sounds like you probably have a really interesting way of doing that. So,
all right, I'll start pulling up these. I'll start pulling up these images then. Boom. All right.
Can you guys hear the woodpecker through my mic?
No,
Ted, we can barely hear you through your mic.
No one can hear you, and you're worried about the woodpecker.
If I get this close, can you hear me?
Yep. Dude, those shadows, look at those things. They're amazing.
Thank you.
I want to make sure everybody else can see this. Okay, cool. Everybody else can see it. Sweet. I was waiting for it to show up on my phone. All right. So, yeah, is this a good image to start with? You okay with that?
Why don't you go back to the one with the contact sheet?
Okay, sweet. Starting here.
All right. So earlier I was talking about, building an image. First of all, I second shot this with Scott Jusweet, Scott's one of my favorite people. If you ever get a chance to spend more time with Scott, do it. He's a great person, great business person. Really just gets it right on every level. So, when I was getting back into wedding photography full time, Scott took me on as a second shooter for a whole bunch of his weddings. I think maybe we did 10 or so, something like that. So I had an opportunity to work with Scott a lot. So, we become really close friends, and Just a great guy. I learned a ton from Scott. Insane professional. This is a wedding that we were at. So I was on the opposite side of the dance floor, and I heard like cheering happening. I was shooting like some normal BS stuff at a wedding reception. I think it was like a posed grip and grin that, people ask for. And I heard cheering. So I kind of like left this a little bit. And if you remember a couple minutes back, we talked about layers. I'm going to kind of try to walk through my thought process here. I consider this a failure, right? I consider this a huge miss for me in terms of what I was trying to do. So what I was trying to do here, and the way I approach a layered scene is I try to talk about building a photograph like we build sentences. And the first part of that for me is our noun and verb identification, right? So I always try to do that. I identify my noun and my verb. So in this case here, I have grandmom drinking, right? Noun and verb, pretty easy, right? So, but like we talked about earlier, the dog ran. It's a kind of a boring sentence. Grandmom drinking. It's kind of a boring sentence. I feel like there needs to be more to that. Now, the problem with that is when we try to add more stuff in the frame, it becomes harder, right? Because you're introducing more elements and you have to balance them compositionally and all that sort of stuff. So if you look at the first four across the top, I have grandmom drinking. And then what I try to do here is I looked at the audience and I said, man, I have a great opportunity here. I have a juxtaposition between a grandmom and all of these young guests, but I need to try to incorporate them. So what I tried to do, if you can kind of see, I swung to my left pretty severely to try to get the background of all the guests. And by the time I did that, the moment was kind of over. And I was holding my camera above my head to try to like get that all, to capture that whole scene of all these young guests. Like if you look at the reaction of the guests, they were awesome, right? I was the one who failed, right? I failed here to incorporate them in an artistic way, right? I completely missed that mark, right? So, I was kind of bummed at that. I ended up with I think a photo that people will like, that second one in from the top left, grandmom drinking. Yeah, that one there, Tommy. I think people like that. And I can understand that, it's fine. It works. But for me as a photographer, I feel like I missed a really good opportunity to layer her in a juxtaposition against these younger guests who were cheering her on. So for me, I think this is a fail. Yeah, you could see all that, so the first four, grandmom drinking, and then I try to build my sentence by incorporating more characters and more adjectives. And the moment kind of fizzles out pretty quickly. In a matter of seconds, it's gone. The woman in the blue dress takes the bottle away and she moves forward.
If you could go back and finish the sentence, what would you have tried to tell with that story?
So I would love it if, young party goers, cheer on grandmom as she jugs from the large bottle of champagne, like that to me is a better sentence than grandmom chugs from the large bottle of champagne. I feel like it's a more complete sentence. It's a more interesting sentence, more interesting story, more characters. I just think there's more to it, more levels, more layers to it.
It's like more immersive, right? Like just
Absolutely.
getting deeper into like that universe in a way, just in one shot, which is cool. Man, I'm just going to say it again. I love how your failures would be our portfolio pieces. I think that's amazing.
So accurate. So accurate. So that's the first sheet, right? That's the failure you're talking about. You want me to go to the second sheet now?
Yeah. So I was kind of bummed. And I was like, all right. So I followed the champagne bottle, right? This is literally the next scene. So the person in the blue dress, the woman in the blue dress takes the bottle to a different group.
This is all pre-COVID-19.
Oh yeah. This is, I think, last summer, not this past summer, the one before. So yeah, definitely pre. So, if you look, I do the same thing again, right? I have bridesmaid drinking. And then I say, there's more here, right? But luckily I was here at this scene when, I was able to be with it for the whole thing. And, so I quickly transitioned from bridesmaid drinking. If you even notice between the first shot and the second and third, I have pretty much just bridesmaid drinking. And then I slowly start to add characters, right? So I say bridesmaid drinking with encouraging boyfriend, right? Or something like that. So then I start to say, all right, there's more here. I know I can get more to this. So I often work with a wider angle lens on a dance floor. I think this is a 24 millimeter. So, I'm pretty close at this time to a lot of the action here. So I kind of spin and I'm trying to now balance out the bridesmaid who gets down and starts chugging the bottle, because I think it was towards the end of when it was, about to be empty. So I think she was going to polish this bottle off. So I try to spin and I work this scene. And, while I'm shooting the bridesmaid on the knee, drinking the champagne, I'm also looking at my background, and I'm trying to place all of those heads clearly in the background. So Tommy, if you want to advance one, this is the resulting image, or go back one, sorry. Yeah, so that's my winner, right? So I feel like this is a much stronger sentence. Like, this is my success. This is where I was able to, balance out all of these elements. From, the far left, you have the bridesmaid who's like maybe a little bit shocked and appalled. If you look far right, you have, maybe a boyfriend who's like disgusted, like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to carry her back to her room. If you look below him, you have the encourager saying, come on, you're almost there, just this much, and you have, and everyone's head is kind of cleared, right? If you look, you kind of have everybody's face is sort of identifiable here, right? So it happens quickly, but that's the process that I try to go through when building a scene with multiple layers.
That's so awesome. It's so cool to see that kind of from start to finish too. To see like what's happening in the camera. Yeah,
it's, and like I said, it if I had only shot Grandmom drinking, I would have, it's fine. Like I would have been okay with it. It wouldn't have been like a portfolio piece or anything like that for me. This is closer to a portfolio image for me because it's more complete. It's more part of what I'm trying to do as a photographer, which is tell a complete story, right? I feel like the Grandmom drinking image, anybody can make that, right? Anybody, that's kind of luck. You walked over and you have a Grandmom drinking. That's gold, right? But anybody, like what I try to do is I encourage people to push, right? So you have Grandmom drinking. That's like low hanging fruit, right? But I feel like as a photographer with Grandmom drinking, I didn't do much to make that image. I just happened to be there, right? With this image here, I feel like I made this image, right? Like I feel like I didn't just settle on bridesmaid drinking. I tried to make it a deeper documentary image, if we can bring it back to what our crash course is about. I tried to make it a deeper documentary image rather than I just happened to be there when a bridesmaid was drinking a bottle of champagne.
Right.
I think this is a great example of what you talked about earlier with the shallow depth of field. Like I was thinking about that as we're looking at this, like how different would this image be if it was shot at 1.8 or 2.8? Like the story wouldn't be about the collective group of people cheering on this girl. It would be about the girl drinking,
it'd be less powerful.
Champagne. Yeah, it wouldn't be as emotional or impactful at all. I think that's really a good point you brought up earlier.
Hey,
thanks, Ted. Yeah,
another thing.
Go
ahead. Sorry.
One of the things I try to do with receptions, because obviously the light's going to be an issue, right? Is I try to start at f4 as best I can. The advantage of working with a 24 millimeter is, and you are right, Ted, the advantage of working with 24 millimeter is if I have to go to like 2.8, at 2.8 at 24 millimeters, you get a decent bit of depth of field. So it's a lot different than if you're at an 85 at 2.8, you'll have so much less depth of field. So at 24 millimeters, that's one of the reasons why I like wider angle lenses, is because it does give me depth of field, even if I have to open my lens up to like 2.8, or let's just say f2 or something like that. You do get a little more depth of field there.
So here's the real question. Here's the real question we're all wondering. Did you add some grain to this, and did you win a Fearless award for it?
I'll answer the second question. I don't belong to Fearless, and I have not entered a contest since 2011.
Chuck, it was a joke. We do that jab every time.
Oh, sorry, man.
Contrast, grain, clarity, and Fearless. No, hey, so for some people wondering, including myself, with this, I noticed, there in documentary photography, you're seeing a lot of sometimes there's contrast and dramatic lighting and stuff like that, but stuff like this to like capture everything in the background, you have this nice, like, even, not really the right term, but you have like, it's well lit. You can see everybody. It's not shadows on everybody's faces, but I believe what I'm seeing in the top left is off camera lighting. What's your setup for this, just to get to the technical side a little bit too?
Yeah, I try to keep it pretty basic, especially if I'm second shooting, right? If I'm second shooting, I try to really stay out of the main photographer's main setups and try to just keep things really basic. So a lot of times you're right. That's my off-camera flash on the camera left. And I try to work toward my off-camera flash. So I try to work into it. And I work individually with a on-camera flash for fill. So, two light sources here. My on-camera flash, which is kind of that flat lighting that you get here, right? So, I mean, the lighting's kind of flat, right? Because it's just kind of bouncing around them at this here. But I have that fill in the back to kind of make sure the background doesn't go completely dark.
Right. So awesome. All right, cool. Let's bounce to the next image. Is this one okay?
Oh, this is one of my favorites.
So sure. Good. Thanks, man. That's the first image in my portfolio. Thank you.
Love it. So this is one of the ones like we were talking about before where it's like, this is the one I looked at and go, what did you miss to get this? Or what did you not miss, but like, what did you give up or like look for to get this specific shot?
So I work, when I shoot, I shoot with primes. I typically have 2 cameras on me, and on my right hip is usually my wide angle, because I probably shoot most of my day at 28 millimeters. That's my go-to focal length these days. Probably in the last 3 or 4 years, 28 millimeters is my preferred focal length.
Love it.
So I have 28 millimeters on my right hip, and on my left hip, I typically have an 85 or sometimes a 135 if I'm in a church. That's the longest lens I have, is a 135. So in this particular case here, I was kind of limited on where I could be. And I got stuck in the corner. And the way that the church was sort of set up, it was really kind of awkward of where I could be. So I think a lot of times, like we talked about, like, what didn't I shoot? Well, one of the main parts of documentary photography is that documentary photography can be super limiting, right? Because we can't interject, and we can't tell people to go over here, and we can't, direct this sort of stuff. We can't do that. So we're limited, right? We're limited by the actions of our subjects. So I've learned to, over the years, sort of embrace these limitations and make the best of them. So when I get stuck in a corner, I don't go, oh shit, like, what am I going to do? I'm stuck in this corner. Instead, I'm like, okay, I'm stuck in this corner. What am I going to do? And I problem solve. So part of what I problem solved with here is I really did not want an 85 on. I wish I had my 135, but there's no way I could have gone back to the back of the church and gotten the 135 and come back to the scene. So the way I problem solved this particular scene, the bride was really emotional. And she kept kind of like wiping her face and wiping her tears. So I kind of saw all of that unfolding. So I quickly switched my camera mode. At the time I was shooting a D750, and it has a crop mode. So I quickly switched to crop mode, and that gave me it made my 85 like a 135, right? So I kind of saw all of this coming, because I could see the bridesmaid kind of reaching for the tissues, and I could see the bride reaching her hand back. Like, the bride kept staring ahead at the priest, and I can see her kind of reaching back for her tissues. So at that point, I kind of anticipated all of that, and I shot through this moment. I shot the bride, I shot the maid of honor reaching toward it to this peak action. And then after, with the bridesmaid kind of holding, bringing her hand back, I kind of shot through that whole moment. So, really this image is just a matter of problem solving. Being stuck in a spot that was not my ideal spot. I would have liked to have been further left if I could have, or maybe even further right, like maybe 45 degrees. But this is where I was in this particular scene. So I made the most of it. And one of the things I talk about in my classes is that when you go through a process and you put yourself in a position to succeed, things like this happen more often than not. And I think that's something that people who maybe don't shoot documentary have a hard time understanding, is that how does this naturally unfold? You must have directed that. This is completely 100%. I was off to the side. I was not anywhere near the stage. I didn't tell the maid of honor to like hand her a tissue. But because I was in a position to be successful and this happened, I was able to capture it.
I love this photo, dude. It's so great.
Thanks, Seb.
And it's awesome because it implies a lot of things that the viewer can pick up on and assume a lot. Like, we can't see the bride's face as she's crying, but this tells a story that we know that's what she's doing. And like, I just love that. Like, you didn't need to include her face in this to show the story of her emotions. And, seeing the bridesmaid's face really matters too, I think. But man, what an overall great photo, dude. I really love this one.
Yeah, I love how this is like how it's documentary and it's totally undirected, yet this could totally be an ad for something. Like, it's such a powerful photo. I love it.
Yeah,
thanks, fellas. You're making me blush.
The separation of the bride and the bridesmaid and stuff like that it makes it look like it's lit. I'm sure this is probably. I mean, are you using flash in the church for this, or is this the natural lighting in the church?
No, I mean, you guys know from being in churches a lot, you get that crazy spotlights, right? And it's such a different exposure. So,
right.
Part of embracing the limitations is, okay, this is what I'm dealt with. I'm dealt with this spotlight light, and it happened to, you could see how dark it was because the background really just falls off dark.
Right.
I was going to ask about that. Did you add to that, like with contrast, or was it just black right out of the camera?
Well, you got to keep in mind it's a spotlight on a white dress. So if I'm exposing for the dress, that back's going to be pretty dark off the bat. I don't think I burned much around, maybe over here a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm pointing like you guys can see it. Maybe to the left of the groom.
Over here.
Yeah, maybe over there it might have got burned a little bit. I don't really remember, to be honest with you. But I think this is pretty close to out of the camera. I think you guys asked earlier before we started talking about the cropping of this. I think this is pretty close to the exact composition that I shot.
So awesome.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
That's great.
Thank you.
Hey, all right, so let's check out the next one. I love this one. I love all of them. I'm just gonna say it every time. So.
Oh, this one's killer.
So good.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Yeah, so this is, again, every image that we're going to talk about today, at least I think the ones you pulled in, they're all 100% documentary, unstaged, unscripted. So this is, typical bride getting in her dress. One of the things that I do with my clients in our pre-consultation is I talk about, there's going to be people in various stages of undress, and I'm typically with the bride. So, we flat out talk about that. We hit it right up front and have a conversation and a dialogue about it so everybody knows what to expect. And I basically present 3 different options for my brides. The first option is for the super modest bride. Hey, I'm happy to step out of the room. Just keep in mind, if I'm out of the room, I can't be capturing you getting into your gown. It's your choice at the end of the day. So I'll happily step and remove myself from the scene. That's option 1. Option 2 is for example, this bride chose option 2. Most brides do. I stand in front of the bride typically with my back turned until the bride feels comfortable, right? And that's different for every bride. Some brides like to be completely zipped up in the back. Some brides, as long as they're covered in the front, they're totally comfortable with that. But I ask the bridesmaids, when you're comfortable or when she's comfortable, tell me, and whenever I turn around, I'm going to start shooting. So that's what happened here. And the third option is that I'm comfortable with whatever you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable with me shooting you in all different stages of undress, I'm comfortable with that as well. The pictures never see the light of day. I offer a private gallery for any images that, outside of the main gallery. I offer a private gallery for any images that feature any degrees of nudity, because obviously you don't want to share this. And we go in that direction. So it's ultimately up to the bride. I'd say probably 80% of brides choose option B, where I'm kind of standing nearby, and when they feel comfortable, I start shooting. So that's what this bride chose. So I was really in front of the bride, and I was shooting kind of past her toward the girls who were sitting there, the little flower girls. So I was kind of doing that layered thing that we talked about earlier, building a sentence, right? Bride getting dressed. And then I tried to build upon that a little bit, right? So I had shot that a few times, And then I wanted to get mom involved into the mix. Mom is to the far right of the camera, or far right of our scene here. So I kind of spun around, 45 degrees or 90 degrees, I guess, to the scene. And mom was up close. Mom was where the flower girls were. Mom was kind of like helping with the veil. And I guess they were trying to like stretch the veil out. And mom stepped back. And I was like, yes, this is fantastic. Again, just, I didn't say to mom, hey, mom, can you step back or anything like that. I let the moment kind of unfold naturally. And, when she did, it was great. I ended up just sitting on that. And as a result, I feel like I end up with a deeper documentary image rather than just, bride and girls. Now I have multi-generations. I have grandmom, who's the mom. I have her daughter, and I have her grandkids all sort of in the mix here in one complete image. And I think that, Ted, you talked about earlier about stopping down a little bit. And shooting at like f4 and f5.6. I think this was like shot at f5.6. So it does have that depth of field to it.
Where did you, so on like something like this, where would you select your focal point? Would you be looking at for like focusing on mom or the kids or?
Yeah, the good news is when you're at like, and shooting with, so I'm a big Leica fan. I have a digital Leica now, at this point, and I've shot digital Leica probably for the past 6 or 7 years or so. And one of the things that you learn really easily is that, people are like, wow, that's manual focus. Isn't that hard? And if you treat your Leica like you treat a DSLR, it's going to be really hard. But if you understand the way that hyperfocal distance and hyper zone focusing work, depth of field, as long as, like, so for example, you asked like, where would I focus here? When you're at like 24 millimeters and 5.6, it doesn't really matter where you focus because you have so much depth of field, right? So it's kind of liberating. When you stop down, it's really liberating. You don't have to necessarily nail focus all the time. You can stop down and everything's sort of in focus.
That's awesome.
So, in that particular case here, I think I was focused on the bridesmaids. I actually don't remember where I focused here. So yeah, but yeah, working with large depth of field, that it's almost liberating in a way. You can almost focus anywhere.
That's awesome.
We've been talking about having a better depth of field a lot in here. And one place that does that a lot, but people don't usually notice, is Hollywood. If you ever take a filmmaking course about how they do things, they very rarely come down below 5.6 because you want to have that whole story sharp and in focus. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Mike, to take like bits and pieces from the pros, right? From the experts. And not to disparage wedding photographers. I think, we all do what we do well. But, when we're talking about documentary photography, or filmmaking, right? If we're talking filmmaking, let's look to the pros, right? Let's look to the people who are at the top of their game doing it, and to understand what makes for good storytelling. So from a technical aspect, you're 100% right, Mike. I mean, really good storytelling is rarely done at f1.4.
Awesome. All right. I love this one. I'm going to say it every time. So I can't help it. In my head, I'm going, don't fucking say it. Don't say it. Don't say it. And I go like, I love it. I love this one.
Well, I appreciate it, man. You're making me blush.
It's awesome. So good.
Yeah. So this one, this is a favorite. This always gets a reaction. It's one, I think it's like the number 3 image in my portfolio. And in my portfolio, what I think is kind of interesting, and what I try to subliminally say without saying it, is I try to say, I don't always focus on the bride and groom. I try to say that, right? Because, and as a result, I get a lot of clients who inevitably say, I hate having my picture taken, right? I very rarely get a rock star bride who loves being the center of attention, right? Most of the people most of my clients value their family on that day as much as they value it that it's their day, right? So, and I think I've gotten there by subliminally doing things like this. Like, this is the 3rd image. You don't see a bride's face in my portfolio, I think, until like the 6th image or 7th image, right? Like the first image that we just talked about with the bridesmaid hand in the tissue, you don't see the bride's face, right? The second image is of of a maid of honor. She's a little girl, but she's crying. I think this is my 3rd image. right? So you don't really see a bride's face for a while in my portfolio, and that's deliberate. This is one of the images. This couple was adorable. They were so happy that their granddaughter was getting married. They were married for 70 years, and they were so thrilled to be there. I was actually shooting, so I was like literally shooting this way, and I was shooting family formals over in this direction. This is at the Ritz-Carlton in Philadelphia. We had a spot upstairs that we were doing portraits in, and I happened to just kind of look around, and I noticed that this was happening. So I I turned my flash off real quick, scrolled my my exposure reel. Oh, sorry, let me say that again. My exposure wheel really quick. That's hard to say.
That's a tough one.
That was really hard. And I ended up capturing this image here, which, her sneakers, the cane, the disposable camera, the grandfather trying to make the person laugh. And I thought, again, it's important to include the shoulder of the bridesmaid in front of me who was getting her photo taken to complete the story. So, yeah, so this is, I didn't necessarily make this image. We talked earlier about making images, the person chugging the champagne bottle. This was sort of reactionary, but I think that, trying to recognize what makes for a good image with the inclusion of the shoulder in the foreground, I think helps.
Chucky, brilliant son of a bitch. So good. That's
right place, right time on this one.
It is such a good image too. Like when you point out the sneakers, like as I'm sitting here, I'm like noticing every little detail. And it's so awesome. That's such a cool photo. And that is an interesting approach to the portfolio, like you're talking about, where it's like, okay, it is to not show a bride's face and it being intentional. I think it's something a lot of people have to look at, like, what's important to you and what's important to the way you do things and what you want to portray to your couples, and how you show your portfolio.
Yeah, 100%. My portfolio selection process is pretty rigorous. I think about adjectives that I want prospective viewers to say in their head when they view my images. And I think of those. And I have about 4 or 5 of them. And when I choose to put an image in my portfolio, if it doesn't meet those adjectives, it doesn't go in my portfolio. So as a result, I'm leaving out a lot of images that are pretty good. But I think it's so important to have a congruent message between what your images say, what your words say, and what your approach does. I can't tell you how many photographers that I've looked at their websites, who I've been mentoring, and we look at their websites and we look at their words, and they say that they're a photojournalist. They say that they're a fly on the wall, and they say that they let things naturally unfold in front of their camera. And then when you look at their images, it's posed portraits of couple in a field. Yeah. That's not to say that those aren't really good images, right? And that's not knocking those images. I love looking at them. I think there's tremendous talent out there who makes that look really beautiful. My suggestion would just be change your words, right? You don't have to necessarily change your photography, change your words, right? Make it congruent, make your message congruent. So in order to make my message congruent, I try to make sure I want people who look at my portfolio to walk away and say, his images are romantic, they're timeless, they're nostalgic. I want that feeling. They're layered, they're not static. I want them to say that, even if they don't say it out loud. I want them to have that impression. So as a result, I have very few posed photos in my portfolio, right? Because I want to attract a different client.
That's so important though, right? Like anyone that's in our, the book club, this whole month we've been looking at the whole idea of coming up with a story brand, and every single thing from your images to your text to everything telling the same exact story. And I think what you're hitting on is so important, and it's something that a lot of people overlook.
Absolutely. It's like having a brand identity, right?
Yeah.
Like having a clear idea of what your brand identity is super important, and then actually executing it. I do have a question about your culling process, right? For like those images you created. I mean, we saw 2 contact sheets and then 1 photo. That's something I know I struggle with. There's times I'll deliver extra photos because I'm like, I'm not culling anymore. That's good enough. And I'd love to hear what your thought process is on that.
Yeah, it depends. So my culling process. So I guess if you look at it like a pyramid, right? At the tip of the pyramid, at the apex, is our portfolio, right? And I think I would advise anybody who's struggling with portfolio or what to include, what not to include, is to really identify their voice and who they are as photographers. If you love, like I'm going to go the opposite direction of my style. If you love light and airy, and if you love, really beautiful portraits, in fields, embrace that and kick ass in it. Just drive at that, but then only include that in your portfolio. Make your portfolio really. Don't send mixed messages in your portfolio. So, in terms of culling, Tommy, the tip of the apex for me, it by having these adjectives, it really helps me be objective about what goes in my portfolio. I can't just say, oh, but it's a really cute image, like, right, because cute doesn't match what I'm trying to say, right? It could be a good image and it could be really cute, but it doesn't match what I'm trying to say. I think a really good example is the one we looked at earlier, the one I considered a failure, Grandmom Drinking. It's just a cute image, right? It's not strong enough for me to be in my portfolio, right? So that doesn't mean it's not good. It just doesn't fit what I'm trying to say.
Right, and it may get included in the actual, wedding delivery, but not 100%. Necessarily in the portfolio.
Okay, that was my question. I was going to say, I'm sure there are a lot of people watching that are hearing portfolio, but probably wondering, do you deliver those images? And it sounds like yes.
100%. So when you go now, go down a little bit further, right? So we were just at the apex, right? So that won't go in my portfolio, right? Because it doesn't fit my adjectives, right? My core adjectives. Then you go down where you have a little bit more, right? You're going to include more here, right? So, the next step for me would be a blog, right? Now, my blog images aren't always super narrow and hit all my adjectives. I will expand my adjectives. I will include the cute image. I will include the pretty image in my blog, right? And then further down from there is what gets delivered to a client, right? Which is a lot of images get delivered to a client, right? So, that's my process. I try to look at it in three tiers: my portfolio, my blog, and then of course what gets delivered to a client. I'm pretty liberal delivering to a client. If it's a moment that's in focus and people are smiling, or it's a good photograph, my clients get it. I let them try to make that decision. I feel like I over deliver sometimes as a result, but I feel like a client would rather have it than not.
Right.
Can I ask a question for you, Chuck?
No.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been trying to hold this question back the whole time because it might not be related, but now it feels like you're kind of bringing it up. Do you feel like your portfolio speaks enough for itself that clients look at it and say, yes, that's what I want? Or do you feel like you have to kind of explain your style to them when you're in a phone call with them or in a meeting with them? Like, where does that fall?
Awesome question, Ted. So I think of that consciously. So I hope that my portfolio is different enough for clients. Like if a client is cross-shopping me between somebody who's portrait heavy, it should stick out. Like my portfolio should stick out from somebody who's portrait heavy. Okay. So I want to actually make sure that it does. So Ted, what I do a lot of times is I ask the question, what is it that you liked about my work? And I listen to what they say. If they start to say, like, I right off the bat, I know they'll say, oh, but I love how you include other family members. I love how they don't have the photography language. So they don't say things like layered, but they'll hit at that. I love how many, people are in your images, or things like that they'll say. I love that you include other family members. When they start saying things like that, or I love, the best part for me is when they say my adjectives back to me. Like that's a win-win. When they say, but your images are so timeless and they're romantic and they're nostalgic. Like when they say that to me, I know they get it. Right. So I ask the question, if they don't hit at it, I try to lead them down that path in our conversation in a consult. That's a great question.
So a follow-up to that, everything we've looked at so far has been pretty much black and white. Do you feel like that's an important part to get those emotions, those adjectives out of the photos that you want?
And thanks, Tara, for that question.
It's a good question. So part of, I think, the challenge is that when you're shooting pure documentary, you're oftentimes shooting in less than ideal light, right? You're shooting in mixed light. The image it's on is a great example. The image that's on the screen right now is a really, really good example of that. So this is in a hotel lobby for all intents and purposes, right? Where, you've been to the Ritz, overhead can lights, warm, kind of ugly light, right? So this image here does not have the same impact in color that it does in black and white, because the light's not super strong, right? The light, I didn't have my lighting set up. I had a flash on, but I turned it off to spin and get this image. So a lot of times, really great moments happen in less than ideal light. So, for me, a lot of times the answer is to convert that to black and white. Like I know a lot of times that images are not in ideal light and that they're going to be black and white at the end of the day. I also have a personal preference for black and white. If you look at the images behind me, these are personal images that are behind. They're black and white family photography. I'm like, when you guys might have seen Leica has a camera. It's a digital camera that only shoots in black and white. That's $8,000. And you go, who's the idiot that buys that camera? I'm the idiot that buys that camera. That's right. Awesome. Here I am.
That's awesome.
But so it's a commitment. So okay. I like shooting in black and white. I like black and white imagery, right? And it's a very basic tenet of wedding photography or photography in general, which is showing what you want to sell, right? I want clients to connect with black and white imagery because I like it. So hopefully that answers the question.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask kind of similar to that question, like what's the, not percentage, but do you tend to provide images mostly in black and white, or is it kind of down the middle? I know it's going to be dependent on, like you just said, on the lighting and stuff like that, but when they look at your portfolio, they're going to see a lot of black and white. And then my second part to that question is, so like this image you delivered in black and white, do you also deliver it in color, or just specifically one way?
I only deliver them one way. And I do have this conversation with clients during a consult, because my portfolio is probably about 60% black and white. So one of the things we talk about is, and if they don't ask the question, I tell them the question. I said, one question you might be having is, do I get the images in black and white or color? And I give the same answer all the time. And I talk about what we just talked about. I said, I do shoot documentary. I let things unfold naturally. And, sometimes that happens in really bad lighting. So I will convert it to black and white. So you might ask me, hey, Chuck, I want that image in color. I will give it to you in color, but I'll tell you, my professional opinion is it looks way better in black and white. So I have that conversation with them. And then in terms of what I deliver to ultimately to a client, it's usually about 50-50 black and white color.
Nice. Awesome. Well, with that conversation, let's get down. We're almost at a color one. We're almost there. But I love this image.
Thanks, man.
This is absolutely unreal. Crazy.
Thank you. Yeah. So first, I just want to put, for anybody who's watching out there, I just want to say that anytime that there's not a 100%. So far we've talked about every image so far has been 100% documentary, unposed, undirected, unstaged. This image is, I would not say it's staged. I would say it's directed. So this is a room. This is actually Scott's assistant, longtime assistant. He got married. His name's Brian. Great guy. Had a chance to work with him for a bunch. I ended up shooting his wedding. Brian, great guy. This is at the Bond, which is a venue in York, PA. If you've ever been there, where they have the groom get dressed, is awful. It is a really hard room to work in because it's really small. There's stuff everywhere. And I think ambient exposure is like 1/60th of a second, f2, ISO 8000. It's crazy, right? So, and it's really hard. So what I did, sometimes the mess is the picture, right? Sometimes all the crap is the picture, right? So, you know, I worked the room. I did that. Well, we were just getting ready to leave, and you know, Brian was just about finished. He was doing some last minute preps, and I was camping out on this mirror. This mirror is in the corner. So to my left is a black wall, and to my right is a white wall, and they converge in the middle. So I was working that mirror in a documentary fashion, in a 100% documentary fashion. And Brian was just off to the side. He was, again, I'm pointing a little bit. So Tommy, if with your mouse, if you just go to the right of him, he was kind of there. Exactly. He was in that spot. And I just could, so I have a lot of him over in that spot, but it shifted the mirror to the white part of the wall. And they're fine. They look good. I'm happy with them. Those are 100% documentary. So, you know, my back is to Brian. Brian's behind me. I'm shooting this way toward the mirror. So, you know, in that particular case there, I said to Brian, hey, Brian, one step to your left. And he did. He just went one to his left, and he kept doing exactly, like, I didn't tell him all this stuff. He took one step, and here it was. So this was directed. So this image is not a 100% documentary image. So I just want to make sure that we define that.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good conversation to have, though, is like, when is a good time to step in? Clearly, like, this was worth it.
I thought so. I had a pretty good concept. I felt like that was it. What's kind of crazy is, and I should have thought of this. So, okay, so this is the corner of a room, right? The opposite corner, right? So completely diagonal to this was also a black and white wall. What I was really trying to go for was, it would have been awesome if I could have pulled it off. Like, I think this is okay. Mm-hmm. The other thing I was trying to get would have been amazing, because the mirror, it would have been in the mirror, instead of a clear black backdrop, it would have been half white on the left and half cool. Black on the right.
Oh, that would have been cool.
Yeah, no shit, I know, but I couldn't get it. So I was
fucking rubbing it in, guys.
Yeah, I know. Believe me, it's like one of those shots that, like, I'm like, you know, but and they were adjusting, his best man, who was his brother, was adjusting his tie in that scene. So it was like not static. It was like, yes, and I just couldn't get it right. So, you know, Tommy, back to your question, you know, when do I, you know, I knew I had something here. I knew I liked this scene. You know, I never manufacture a moment. I never say to, like, you know, somebody, like, you know, I don't know, cry or something, or, you know, something like that. I mean, with Bridesmaids, maybe I do, like, hey, look to your left, look to your right, tell the funniest joke you've ever heard, ha ha ha, you know, and everybody does that fake laugh that we all do. You know, but his actions were his here, right? So when to interject, I felt like I had a really good concept here, and I felt like my interjection, it was already a quiet moment. Like, it wasn't like Brian was with his brother talking, and I said, hey, Brian, can you stand over here and adjust your blah, blah, blah? Like, it was already sort of naturally occurring. So I felt like a little, like, nudge in the right direction was appropriate here, without breaking the flow of the moment.
So have you ever seen Scott Pilgrim versus the World, Chuck?
No, I haven't.
I'm glad you mentioned that this wasn't 100% documentary, because I envisioned them coming through like the vegan police and, like, you know, like documentary police saying, that's not documentary. We got you. You're going to jail. Like, that'd be funny.
Hey, I have a question. No. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if it's like I said, I think I shared with you all documentary, and I told you guys ahead of time with this one here that it was not. So I just wanted to, you know, point that out to.
Yeah. And I specifically put this one up just so we could talk about, like, when to step in.
Yeah, this is a great one. Hey, question though. I know you're documentary during almost pretty much the whole part of the day. What about, like, portrait session? Do you do anything like that, or with the bridesmaids and all of that? How does that go? Just quickly.
Yeah, that's part of the day, right? So, you know, I do get clients who want 100% hands-off documentary. I'd say probably 20% of my clients want, like, no direction at all, right? They don't want any family photos. They don't want any portraits. They just want to enjoy their day. You know, that's probably about 20%. The other 80% want a hands-off approach with some guidance, right? So during, like, the getting ready, the wedding itself, the reception, that's almost all documentary, like almost 100%. If my client asks like, hey, which door should we come in? They're looking for sometimes I'll say, it's up to you. And I truly mean that. But sometimes I'll say, hey, this door over here is better, right? Like come in this door, technically if you're looking at like true photojournalism, true documentary, then you could say that anybody who comes through that door at that point, it is not true documentary, right? And I think there's a clear delineation between one of the biggest differences, and I think so I'm glad I'm going to go off topic a little bit here, but if you study true documentary photography, right, true photojournalists, true documentary photographers, their subjects are not their clients, right? That is one of the main barriers that differentiates us as even if we say as wedding photographers, we take a 100% documentary approach, our client pays us, right? So you could argue that right there, you're not objective, right? You're not being objective because you're being influenced by payment, right? That's a good point. True documentary photographers, true photojournalists get paid by news agencies or by grants maybe that they were awarded, right? Where they can remain completely objective to their subjects. As wedding photographers, look, at the end of the day, I need a happy client, right? We need happy clients, right? So I think that defining and expectations are totally up to, it's up to us as photographers to define what our expectations are. So yeah, I think that's a super important thing to talk about is that, we as wedding photographers are paid directly by our clients. We are not paid by an outside agency.
Have you ever had a situation where one of your clients got in maybe a disagreement with their parents because they decide to not have family photos? Has that ever happened?
I shot a wedding in Camden, Maine, and that was this past summer. It was awesome. One of my favorite clients, one of my favorite weddings, 100% documentary. And you could tell that the parents were not happy that there were no photos. But that's not something where I think that at that point it's the wedding day, right? It's not going to be like we're going to start a big argument here, So yeah, I think that, in that particular case, there was probably some not happy feelings as a result.
I have another question follow up with that. One of our good friends, I don't know if you know JD Land. He's also a photojournalistic photographer, does a lot of documentary stuff, but he had a story he told in our photo group, well, I'm sure you saw it, where a venue was interfering with some natural moments that were happening that he was trying to capture. And it was like, he doesn't recreate them obviously, but it was hard to get what he normally would get for this couple. Like they were crying and basically the venue came in and was like wiping tears away from their faces while they're in the middle of this moment. This, like you said, this is different from a true documentary style where we are working for our clients. We have a little bit of, we're not completely objective to this whole thing. Like, how do you go about stuff like that? I mean, it's out of your control, obviously, so you do what you can do, but, have you experienced some stuff like that where it's been kind of difficult to do what you do?
Not quite on that level, but definitely with wedding planners, I've had issues with planners where I think that everybody who's in this together, we all have our client, because they're all our client, right? Like a wedding planner, I never get mad at a wedding planner because they're doing their job for their client. We happen to have the same client, and I'm doing my job for my client, right? So I try not to ever take that personal. Where it does get in the way sometimes is, when I think that wedding planners, they might do 50 weddings a year and 49 of them follow a pretty similar recipe for the day. And I'm the idiot who doesn't know what he's doing in her eyes or his eyes, the planner's eyes. I'm the idiot who's doing it differently, right? So I think that there's always this little like push and pull between a wedding planner who doesn't, meanwhile, I've had extensive conversations with my clients. I know exactly what they want. The wedding planner also thinks they know what they want for their clients. So there is a clash at times, right? And I think it just comes down to staying resolute and understanding what, and being resolute without being a jerk, of course, and being understanding and having the confidence in knowing what your client wants and how to execute it.
Yeah,
That's a really good point, man. It's very diplomatic of you too, to think like to see the positive of everybody's intentions being good, and then kind of making that work for what you're doing. That's really a great way to be, I think.
I'm big on body language, and I'm big on trying to be stoic. I think as a result, I guess this goes to trust a little bit. We talked about trust as an overarching theme at times. I try to be stoic and steady. Be in the craziness. The bride that's on the screen right now, Joelle, I love her to death. She was my New Year's bride, from 2019 into 2020. She got it. I mean, her and I got along. She worked so hard as a bride to have a vision. She knew exactly what she wanted. More than most of my brides know what they want. Joelle really knew what she wanted, right? And her and I clicked as a result. There was a bit of that at her wedding where her expectations were very, very, talk about a bride that was on point. She laid it out exactly what she was looking for. And the venue didn't quite get that. So, there were some times when things did not go her way. And the last thing that she needed there was another person saying, yeah, I know, it didn't go their way. That asshole vendor didn't do their job.
Right.
Like, the last thing she needs is one more person. So, that person thought they did their best. It didn't meet their client's expectation, but all I can do is stay calm in that storm and help my client understand that one bad decision isn't going to ruin the rest of your night.
Absolutely. And that's something, we had Jenna Linda Hart on here one time, and she was talking about being an advocate for the client. It's exactly what that is. It's exactly what that is. Just even in the worst situation, making sure that you're advocating for them and saying, hey.
Yeah.
Right,
I'm thinking back to one of my clients years ago. She was fantastic. I love the clients I get. I mean, I can literally say, this is the truth, no BS. And I'm not saying it because I think maybe one of my brides is listening. I have never had a bridezilla as a client. That is a 100% unequivocal truth. I've gotten along amazingly well with every single one of my clients. And I think it lends itself to this type of photography I do. But I had a client years back where she was getting really overwhelmed before the dress came on. There was these family pressures going on. There were some pressures with her bridesmaids. And I could see it. Like, I think part of being a documentary photographer is kind of reading the room and seeing and being really kind of keyed in on the tone and mood of the room. And I could see it. And I said to her, I said, hey, are you okay? And she goes, I need a moment. And I was like, okay, what do you want to do? I can say that you and I want to do a quick private photo shoot and I can have everyone leave. She goes, please do that right now. I was like, okay, no problem. So I put the camera down. I was like, hey, listen, everybody. And these are her best friends. These are her bridesmaids. Her mom was in the room, and here I am kicking them out of the room. And she's like, hey, thanks so much. I'm like, hey, what's up? What's going on? The camera was down. We sat and we talked. She had some things going on. She shared some things with me. I was keyed into it. We came up with some strategies to get out of it. And she felt amazingly better. By just being heard. I guess I was non-judgmental, a non-judgmental voice and objective in the situation. I wasn't tied to any of the emotions, so I felt like she can trust me as a result. And she was able to forge ahead as a result. So no, I agree with what Jenna said. You got to take care of your clients, no doubt.
Yep, absolutely.
That's amazing too, right? Because one arching theme we hear over and over is that everyone gives amazing client experience, right? But very few actually execute it. And that's awesome. It sounds like that's exactly what you did. I love that.
Yeah, let's talk about this image we got up on the screen here. It's one of the ones we have in color, and I think not that it would look bad in black and white, but goddamn, does it look good in color.
I love the gold. That was her colors again. She Joelle's a classic beauty. She loves old Hollywood. Part of the reason why she selected me as a photographer is a lot of my black and whites. Loves old movies. We definitely have some similarities there. So One of the things that we talked about during the consultation was, she had planned the confetti from when Harry met Sally, the kiss from when Harry met Sally. And she sort of had that vision in her head for this image. So she had confetti cannons. That was part of that she wanted that some people dropped the ball. The vendors really didn't do a great job with that. They really kind of let her down, but they ended up pulling it off at the end, but there were some stressors there. As you can imagine, this is right at the stroke of midnight. Right behind me, there was a TV that she had brought in that had the ball drop. So, this one here, I like the image. It's definitely, it's in my portfolio. So clearly I like it. It meets kind of all the things that I like about an image here. But I feel like from a documentary standpoint, this one's kind of like cheating a little bit because I know it's coming, right? I know that the new year, I even have a countdown, right? 10, 9, 8, 7. I know when the cannon's gone off. I know. So I was able, I knew where all of this stuff was going to happen. So I was able to kind of really just plan my shot out and then have it just come down to timing at that point. Right. It's documentary, but in a way I kind of knew it was coming. It's kind of like a bride coming down the aisle or something like that. We know where the bride's coming. We know, where it's going to be. I try to stay in my portfolio. I try to stay away from those types of moments because I guess in a way I want to flex my photojournalistic muscles a little bit and show that I can make images when things weren't expected of sorts, if that makes sense.
Right. And I'm so glad you mentioned the bride coming down the aisle because that's the next one I want to look at.
Yeah.
This is such a cool, I guess I'm cheating a little bit because I know the story kind of as you explained it already, but such a cool moment and such a cool way of talking about dealing with limitations and stuff like that. So let's get into this one.
Yeah. I think one of the things I learned early on when I started to really understand what documentary photography was, is that by taking this approach, and we talked about intent a little bit earlier here. And I think what happens a lot of times, I think people shoot documentary. They talk about moment, right? Moment is like the buzzword, right? I love moments, right? And we all shoot moments, right? We all react to moments, right? We all see it, and we turn around and we're like, click, that's a great moment. Wonderful. You got a great moment. That's true. But I think that one of the things that we can do better as documentary photographers is focus on what makes a good moment, right? And one of the things that makes a good moment is our intent and our approach, right? If we're just going to walk around reacting, we're just going to end up with a bunch of snapshots of cute moments. But if we start working with intent, if we start saying, I'm going to be a documentary photographer and I am going to intentionally make an image like this one here, this is a very intentional image, right? That your documentary images will start to get better, right? So one of the things that I talk about in my classes, if we look at really good documentary images, not just moments where people are happy or smiling, those are like candid moments, and they're a part of what I do as well. But when we start looking at really well done documentary images, you'll find 5 things. You'll find intent, composition, timing, emotion, and magic, right? The very best documentary images typically have those 5 elements: intent, composition, timing, emotion, and magic. And what I talk about when I teach this is that we can only control 3 of them, right? We can control our intent, we can control our composition, and we can control when we press the shutter or our timing, right? The emotion and the magic are subject dependent, right? But my argument is that when we put ourselves in these positions, that you'll be in a perfect spot when motion happens or emotion happens, and you'll be in a perfect spot when a little bit of magic happens, right, to capture it. So a lot of that comes from working within limitations, right? Taking the limitation of a documentary photographer and saying, okay, I am limited, right? I cannot direct, I cannot interject, I have to work within this limitation, and really understanding what that means. So in this particular case here, this is a historic church that allows zero photography inside of the church at all. You have to be in the back vestibule, or you have to be in the balcony. And it's funny because there are literally 5 church ladies. I'm not saying like hyperbole. There's 5 church ladies. I mean, there's really 5 church ladies. And they make sure that you don't enter that church with your camera. So I asked, I got there early. Tommy and I talked. We're early birds. I got there early, talked to the church lady. She said, hey, you can do the balcony. Fine. So I always keep a tripod in my car. It's a small travel tripod. And went to the car. And I had time to plan this, right? So talk about intent, right? I had a lot of time to plan this. So I shot this. I got my 20 millimeter lens. I knew I wanted to shoot it wide to capture the whole scene. And I knew I wanted motion blur, right? So I started to play as guests were arriving. I started to play a little bit with the different shutter speeds. I had my composition set, and I settled on, this is a 2-second exposure. What I wanted to capture was not just the blur of the bride and the dad going down the aisle, but I wanted to capture the movement of the crowd. I thought that would have been a nice added element to it. So as I was looking through my viewfinder, 2 seconds gave me that. And that felt good to me, like 2 full seconds. So this is a 2-second exposure on a tripod.
That's so awesome. And when you say like that, you weren't allowed in the church, they're saying like anywhere past the, where she would walk in or any that kind of stuff, but you could be up in the balcony. Yeah,
there's actually cool signs. There's big signs that say I think it says absolutely no photography. like it literally says that.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I have to always wonder if I don't know what the decision process is on that for couples. Like if they understand that it's absolutely no photography when they're making that choice. Like it seems, I don't know, it just seems weird to me.
Yeah, well, you know what? It did for me for a while, but I kind of backed off of that a little bit. I'm not religious. I grew up Catholic, but I'm not a practicing. I don't practice religion. And what I've come to understand is that I think it's a really great lesson in this day is not about photography. That's a weird thing for a wedding photographer to say. But this day it should be about the ceremony. It should be about the ritual. It should be about the coming together of 2 families. And the second that we forget that, I feel like we start forcing our views onto couples, and that's not good, right? Right. So they know, like what's kind of cool, this couple, I believe her parents got married in this church at the same spot 50 years prior or whatever it was. Oh, so that's more important than images, of her getting married to her. And I think that's beautiful. I think there's beauty in that, right? Just because it doesn't fit my definition of what I think, how I should be able to photograph this thing, instead of saying, man, that sucks, I can't photograph it, this is going to suck. I learned, hey, I can't photograph this. Okay, where can I stand? Okay, I go into problem solving mode, like I talked about earlier with the tissue picture. Okay, how can I make this interesting? I'm limited. I'm extremely limited here. How can I pull out an interesting shot as a result? And I came up with this.
It's a really great perspective, actually. That's awesome, Chuck.
Perfect.
Thanks, man.
All right.
You guys are too kind.
That's a terrible way of thinking, Chuck. Why would you ever think that way?
Son of a bitch.
No, that's probably the best way to approach that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially rather than and getting frustrated with it or getting angry rather than looking for a solution. It only gets you out of your headspace for creating. It gets you in a bad mindset to do your job for the day. So it's good to go into problem solving.
I think taking a documentary approach helps me there. Mm-hmm. Right? Because think about it. If I'm a photographer who's controlling everything, and that's my bread and butter, right? My bread and butter and my money makers are when I can best control the scene. How the hell am I going to react when I'm told I can't photograph this ceremony?
Right.
Like that's hard. That would have to be really hard for somebody who is used to directing.
Yeah, it's called a mini fucking panic attack. Especially if you didn't know ahead of time and you didn't discuss it with your client ahead of time.
Yeah. I knew I was not allowed in this church. I didn't know what my boundaries were.
Right. Awesome.
To me, that's actually kind of the draw of doing wedding photography versus other kinds of photography, is I don't get to control everything. And it's kind of like the challenge of it to me, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
All right, let's look at some more of these photos here. How about this one? I love this one. Ah, God damn it, I said it again.
If everybody's out there, we got to play the drinking game. Tommy says he loves one of my images.
Son of a bitch.
But, everybody's drunk right now.
Right. Everybody's hammered. All right, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so this is from the second wedding I've ever shot in my life, back in 2010.
Fuck you.
Well, I think there should be some some qualifiers to that. Going back, I didn't pick up a camera and say I'm going to become a wedding photographer. None of this was supposed to happen. None of this was in my plans. I picked up a camera because I liked it, and I think that's really important. So prior to this, I photographed my family. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I photographed my family virtually every day for a period of 6 years. So if you think about, if you've read the Malcolm Gladwell books, Outliers, he talks about the 10,000 hour rule, and he talks about the Beatles and, things like that, and how the Beatles became so great and through all this practice in these really terrible clubs that they were in. Well, I was practicing, on my family. And one of the things I try to do with my students when we go through exercises we talked about earlier is putting them in low risk, high reward situations, right? Where there's no risk at all and the reward is great, right? So anytime as an educator, coming from a teaching background for 19 years, anytime I can put my students in low risk, high reward, they want to take risks, right? Because it's safe, right? It's safe to take risks when you're in a low risk, high reward. So for 7 years, I was in a low risk, high reward situation. I learned so much during that time. So when it came time for me to shoot my first weddings, I remember posting these in forums and people were like, no way, this is your first wedding. And it's a little misleading to say it's my first wedding, or second wedding, because, there's a really cool meme that shows like the iceberg, and it shows just the tip of the iceberg above, and it shows all the stuff under the iceberg. I had done years of work every single day prior to my first wedding. So when I got to my first wedding, it was like, I was a caged lion ready to go. So I had an understanding. It wasn't like I just picked up the camera. So this scene here, if you could look to the far right of the frame, these are bridesmaids that were kind of posing for, I think, just a candid shot. The flower girl was the real story here. She was, kind of over it all. It was hot. She was on the rooftop and, just kind of disinterested in it. And I love the shadows of the bridesmaids on the wall here. So I feel like that was again, talking about inclusions and exclusions, I felt like that was an interesting way to go about it.
That 10,000 hour thing you're talking about, and that whole tip of the iceberg piece is something we talked about before we went live a little bit, but it was the, talking about how, you see baseball players who are still, who are already playing in the major leagues, already all-stars, who still hammer away at the fundamentals, who still practice the fundamentals, practice those pieces. And like, if you don't know what those are you even doing that? Right. So like, as a photographer, what are those fundamentals that you should really be, practicing your craft every day at home, even when you're not on the job? What is, we used to call it like cutting your teeth or woodshedding it, or, different things like that.
Yep.
Are you doing those things? I know I'm not, right? It's, other things get in the way, life gets in the way, jobs, family, stuff like that. But, are you finding ways to hammer away at the fundamentals and, at least look back at those things and say, am I still doing that? Do I still look at that?
Yeah. Awesome question. So to be honest, today, not so much. I mean, I've been at this for, 16, 17 years at this point, right? So not so much, but without question, early on, one of the biggest things I think that I help my current photography students with is helping them do those things, giving them structure, right? And it comes down, I'm going to go back to that word intent again, right? So it's like, almost like you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. It's kind of confusing to think about, but it's true if you think about that. You don't know what you don't know. So like, for example, I think a lot of students who come to me have a really strong sense of moment. They know what a good moment is. They can capture a moment, but their photographs often lack structure. They often lack composition. So one of the big things that I talk about with my students, and what I really encourage anybody who maybe is stuck, who's maybe just stuck on being reactive and just kind of like shooting for the sake of shooting, just turning around and seeing people smiling and photographing that, as opposed to making a photograph out of that scene. I think that you can really help by looking at very basic, you can help yourself along by looking at very basic principles of composition, right? There's several elements of composition. There's leading lines, there's framing, there's symmetry, there's balance, there's simplicity. And one of the things I help my students do is we look at those and we shoot towards them. We say, hey, you know what? Forget moment, right? While you're practicing at home on your children in a low risk, high reward scenario, I want you to make 3 images that have framing elements and 3 images that feature leading lines. So then what that does for the student is how liberating, think about that for a second, how liberating that is. Instead of looking at everything, now as a photographer, all you're looking at are framing elements. That's it. You can forget everything else and you can focus on framing elements. So now you're photographing your kids, low risk. You have intent, photographing framing elements. And now it's a matter of just executing, right? Intent, composition. So think of the 5 things we talked about that make up a great image. Intent, composition. So you've just done those 2 things. Timing. So now you have this great framing element set up. Now all you're going to do is click the shutter at the right time. So you just control what you could. Now what's kind of cool is that when you go through that process, emotion comes into play and magic comes into play. So, you know, you're photographing your kids and you have this great framing element set up. They're outside, you're inside looking at them through your window and you're using the window as a framing element. They walk into the scene, you have intent, you have composition, you have timing, and now guess what? The kid looks around, he doesn't see you, and he pulls down his pants and he starts to pee. Well, because you went through a process, you're in a position to capture magic, right? So I really strongly suggest that, you know, really just kind of honing in on your process. And another thing, maybe it's time to talk about it now. It's maybe a good idea. One of the things that really helps me is my mantra when I shoot is slow down, stop down, and sit down. Okay. So slow down, right? So let's take the picture that's on the scene. I'll kind of walk you through, you know, it's been a long time since I made this image, but this is how I imagine I would make this image. Slowing down, right? So when I slow down, my camera's down, right? And I'm thinking, right? I'm looking about where the light comes in. I'm looking for my compositional elements, right? Do I see any framing elements? Do I see any leading lines? You know, I'm a lot of times I use balance in my images, right? As a compositional element. So, you know, I'm slowing down and I'm looking at those things, right? Next up, stop down. We talked a little bit about this earlier. From a documentary perspective, I want to stop my lens down, right? I don't want to be shooting at f2. I don't want to be shooting at f1.4. I want to stop down. I want to be at 5.6 if I can, right? So I'm going to stop my lens down and then I'm going to adjust my exposure, right? So I've slowed down, I've stopped down, and now I'm going to sit down. And what I mean by sitting down is going to be literally staying in this spot and working this composition, right? I've already identified my subjects here. I've already gone through my slowdown. I already have my exposure set up. Now it's a matter of waiting, right? And it's staying in this particular spot until the moment completely falls apart or the scene completely changes. So that slow down, stop down, sit down helps me get to that.
That's awesome. I think that's amazing. Hey, back to the sports thing. We've been talking a lot about the 10,000 hours, and I feel like this sometimes gets neglected in our industry because the culture is very much do the least amount of work for the most reward you can get, right? And I mean, that's assuming people only shoot when they're being paid to shoot. Of course, they're probably out practicing. But once you learn things like what you're talking about, like looking for the leading lines, and you're practicing constantly when you're in the real world environment, that should click. Like, oh, hey, those are leading lines over there. And that's something like I know growing up playing sports, you do the fundamentals over and over and over so that when you're in that stressful situation, it's muscle memory. Like you've built up those muscles and it all just fires the whole process. And I think that's so amazing. Like, and people really should do that.
1000%, Mike. And if you've ever mentored with me, or if you've ever taken my documentary photography class, you've heard this. And I believe it to my core. I say this over and over and over again. My students get sick of hearing it. The process is far more important than the result, right? So the process of going through and seeing these leading lines, your pictures might suck at this time. I get that. I understand that. And that's hard because no one ever picks up the camera and says, I'm going to make a bad picture. You pick up the camera because you want to make a good picture, right? So it's really hard for my students initially to kind of get over that hump. But I believe it at my core that the process is far more important than the result. So when you go through the process, when the time comes, you're going to be able to say, boom, muscle memory, here's my framing element. And now you have a scene that is beneficial to all the hard work you had done.
So awesome. Hey, can we take a look at some of your family photography? Is this
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right, awesome. I figure we've been talking about that a little
Balls
bit.
in your court, man. I'm here for you guys.
Cutting your teeth. Hold on, I'm gonna switch over to that screen. I think it's a good time because now we're talking about that practice and talking about where that stuff comes from. And all right, here we go. Let me slide this over.
By the way, Chuck, I'm getting so much out of this. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm learning a ton, and I'll probably tell you later time when we're not in the podcast, but I'm going through a journey, and I'm in the middle now where I'm like slowly being drawn over to the documentary style photography, and it's really life-changing to like have this stuff go through my brain all the time. It's happened in January, so it's been going on for a couple months now, and it's been churning, and I'm really loving the stuff you're talking about.
Awesome, man. Yeah, thanks for having me, Ted. I genuinely mean it, man. This is awesome. I love talking photography. I hope it comes off that I'm passionate about this stuff. You know, I love it. So I'm happy that somebody's getting something out of it. I appreciate it, Ted. Thanks.
And too, I second shot with you, I think last year, right? And I'm going through my mind. I'm like, man, I feel like I messed up even more now, knowing all the stuff that he was very intentional about and the stuff that I was not intentional about. I'm like, man, what did I mess up at that wedding?
Yeah, you were dog shit. He told me about it before you came on.
Terrible.
That's funny.
You were very gracious and friendly about it, but you know, now I'm thinking, man, he was so nice to me. I bet you he goes home and like, man, these photos suck. Ted sucked.
No, not at all, Ted. I was happy to have you, man. You were awesome that day, for real. And you know, and that's a good point too. I think that there's so much more about a wedding day than the images that matter. And Ted, you were just an amazing person to be around. I think everybody who's been around you knows that and says that. So my clients loved you. And, you know, so yeah, I think that there's so many ways to be of value on a wedding day.
Awesome. All right, let's talk through some of this personal stuff. I mean, I think it speaks for itself, but like just, you know, from the process, from getting the process, like maybe the type of things you focused on when you were getting these images and like, and like just how you apply it. So like, I know if I'm going for a walk with my kids and stuff like that, sometimes you know, not to say this in a weird way, but like sometimes you want to just be in the moment and you're like, I don't want to bring my camera, but I feel like it's a good opportunity that you can maybe do both. And you could talk about that.
Yeah. So it's a really good one. Tommy, if you could, because I'll talk about your question through this picture. If you go to the fourth picture across the stage. Yeah. So yeah, Tommy, just to kind of hit on what you said there, because I've got that a lot. I you know, oh man, you know, when you're photographing your family, aren't you afraid you're going to be out of the moment? Aren't you afraid you're not in the moment? And my response to them is the same thing all the time, is that if I capture the moment if I capture a meaningful moment in an artistic way, I get to relive that moment for the rest of my life. I don't get to just live in it in the moment where it's happening. I get to go back and, oops, sorry guys, I just got a message from a client. I get to be in this moment forever. Okay. So, you know, I talked about working within limitations a little bit earlier, and this is a really good example. So that's my son on stage. This is 5th grade. And where we live in our district, they go from 5th grade and they graduate. It's called a moving up ceremony, and they go to 6th grade. Okay. So in this particular scene here, I was positioned all the way to the right. It was a completely packed auditorium. I was positioned all the way to the right. And going back to using your ears to listen, I wanted to make a meaningful photograph. And, I shot this with my Leica. And if you've ever shot with Leica, it's not like a DSLR where you get to have 8,000 clicks. You could do 20 frames a second and just spray and pray, as they say. In fact, every image in this portfolio was shot with a Leica monochrome. So that's why everything's black and white. So Leica monochrome is a camera from 2008. It's a dinosaur. It is not a very user-friendly camera, but what it does is it really helps me hone in on the process. So again, going back to intent, composition, and timing, right? So on this particular image here, from my seat, I knew I had these 2 spotlights on the stage. And when I metered them, they were so bright that everything else went black. And I kind of like that. So what I did is I used my ears, and I was waiting for my son's class to get called to the stage. Now, I know that I'm Anerino, A. My kid's going to be first or second, right? So I knew that. So as they called my sons up to the stage, I started to think about my elements of composition, right? So, my elements of composition here are symmetry and simplicity, right? So what I did is I moved to the center of the auditorium, right? So I was dead center, and I crouched down. I was in like an aisle, and I crouched down. So at this point here, I literally have this exact scene set up for me, right? Now, all I'm waiting for at this point is my son to walk into that spot. And what I'm trying to symbolize here is this is 5th grade. Now, 6th grade, as I know at this point, having 2 older boys, 6th grade, things change. You hit puberty, things, it's life is really different at that point. So this is kind of like the last steps of innocence of sorts as he exits this stage, right? So that's where I wanted him in the stage. So I had one shot at it really, because my Leica is 1 click at a time. So it became a matter of timing, and that's where I pressed the shutter. So that's kind of my thought process to make this image.
That's so awesome.
I have actually a real question. So,
oh, good.
How do you get your mind away from the valuable photo being the one where he's in the middle of the stage looking at this direction of the audience to the valuable photo being the story? Because obviously this is telling a story with your intent. You just explained that. Like, how do you get your mind to think about that type of valuable photo versus a traditional smile at the camera kind of a photo?
In this bit, and I did, Ted. When it was all over, I had him hold up his little certificate, and I took that shot, right? So I do think there's value in both. I'll answer your question, but it just made me think about something real quick here. So, I fancy myself as this documentary photographer who's thoughtful about his images, right? And, most of the time I stray that way. The downside to that is that I don't take very many snapshots anymore. And that kind of sucks as a photographer. Like, if I don't have the conditions to kind of make this a really interesting image, like, my standards are pretty high now at this point. I know what a good image looks like. I know what I want to get out of an image. So when I can't get that out, I just put the camera down, and that kind of sucks. So, I don't know, Ted, I guess part of what you said, one of the things I really don't want to ever do as a photographer is be cliche. There are so many cliche, in any art, there's cliche abound, right? There's cliche everywhere. So it's not that I don't take those shots, but I don't want to show those shots, right? I'd rather show more thought-provoking, more meaningful shots than the standard, cutesy shot. So I don't know how you transition to that. I guess I just have a desire to tell deeper stories.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah. And I think what Ted's question would be like, all right, so for, right off the bat, you would think, okay, when they go to hand him the diploma, whatever it is, and like shake his hand, like that's the shot. and then to
Well,
get yourself in that more creative kind of, you know, where this is. Is that
well,
what you
think
meant?
about that. Yeah, and that's a good point. But so going back to limitations in this scene, this is the scene I was given,
Right.
right? I can't change it. This is the scene I was given, right? So I have to problem solve. So the shot that Ted just talked about, you know, if this teacher or principal or whatever was standing dead in this spotlight right here, then maybe that is the image I would have taken,
Right.
right? But I was limited, right? This is the equation that I was given to solve, right? So I had to solve it, right? So I taking the shot that Ted talked about isn't even an option here.
That's
Right.
actually a good question just got asked, and I know we're waiting until the end for them, but someone asked, when shooting with intent, what happens if someone gets in the way? And I feel like you kind of just answered that with that. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and you know, we can't control it, right? And that happens. You know, that absolutely happens. You know, when people get in the way and ruin a well-intended photograph, it 100% happens. And, you know, one of the exercises I do with my students is we put gaffer's tape over our LCDs. In documentary photography, it does you absolutely no good to be pissed that just happened. You have to stay in the game and you have to think forward. So your LCD, looking backwards at your LCD, doesn't help a documentary photographer. You have to think forward to the next scene.
Wow. That's so awesome. That's such an interesting exercise too. Let's pick another one.
Yeah, by all means, man. Anyone that tickles your bits, man.
Let's see. Mike,
Uh,
go ahead.
I
Tommy,
love that campfire one, but talk about the other ones.
Yeah, Tommy, you asked about, you know, going for a walk with your kids and you don't want to, you know, be out of the moment. If there's three kids silhouetted up against on the wall. Yep.
That's one I was about to click on.
Okay, so this wasn't that long ago. This was, you know, I think this was maybe in November. Really nice November day. Hey guys, let's go for a walk. We go to our local state park. So there's this wall that we were all sort of walking on. And I was with them. I kind of bring my camera with me. You know, I'm not super prolific. I don't shoot a ton, you know. I try to like take a shot, you know, if I have it. And in this particular scene here, I kind of hopped off the wall. My kids at this point get me. They're been at their whole lives. They've had their camera pointed at them. So they sort of understand what I'm doing, but they're like, Dad, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, just keep walking, guys. Keep doing your thing. You know, and they were going to walk to the end of this thing. So I ran ahead of them. I literally sprinted ahead of them and was able to sort of compose this. Again, very similar thought process to the image that I just talked about. I had it set up. I had the composition set, and, you know, I knew where they were going to walk. And one of the things that I look for whenever I have people walking perpendicular to me is I look for the stride. When legs are separated, right? I almost always wait for the stride for their legs to be like this as opposed to bent. It's more dynamic, but it's a little thing. I look for that. So yeah, so Ted, so Tommy, yeah, I mean, wasn't really worried so much about missing moments or anything like that. I'm able to have this moment for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. I have a thing with like hammering away at something. Like when I have a photo or like when I see a good shot or see something I like, I'm just like da, 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 and I just like tap away at it, and I feel like I get so many photos. And I remember seeing a video, what was it, like 2 years ago, or maybe longer, when it was a camera review where they were talking about this 20 frames per second thing, and the guy, what was his name? Mike, who's that guy who shoots Sony that always wears a fedora and flips his camera around?
Jason Lanier.
There you go. He was talking about like dress throws and stuff like that, and like these real setup shots, but it was, sitting there with that spray and pray versus taking a single shot and actually like being intentional with your timing. He goes like, here, look, blah, 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 and they throw the dress and he takes a bunch of shots. He's like, okay, so you can see all these shots, and he goes, now watch this. They throw it once and he hits it right when he feels like it's the right time. And it was just a more dynamic, better photo. Same setup, same lighting, same exact position, and it just when he waited to boom, like when it looks right, and the way cameras work now is instantaneous. So I feel like that timing, like you're talking about, and not just hammering away at something, really just waiting for that moment is really important.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I try to do is not follow like industry trends. I try to do my own thing. I don't follow very many wedding photographers on Instagram. I don't belong to Fearless. I don't, it's not like out of snobbery or anything like that. There's amazingly talented people. But I feel like I want to kind of forge my own path. I want to try to do my own thing as much as I can. And, Tommy, what you said, I think, I talk to people who have attended the foundation workshop. And one of the things they preach is, shooting really wide and getting really close and hammering the shutter and shooting through moments. That's one of the things they preach. And there's validity to that. And I think that I've read that photographers like Two Man, they shoot like 25,000 images per wedding or something like that because, and that's great. I'm not going to knock that ever. I'm not going to say that's the wrong way or my way is the right way. I think what's super important is you have to find out what works best for you. I take a tremendous amount of pride in using a 12-year-old camera that has no frames per second, that's manual focus, and being able to be super deliberate about my compositions. That feels good to me as a photographer. Right. Somebody who is maybe giving me a really harsh critique might say, you need to keep shooting this exact scene because you don't know that your son's going to fall off the wall. And if you don't keep shooting through that, you won't get that image. I can't argue with that logic. They're probably right. So I think that what's really important is, part of it, I'm never going to preach to do it my way. I'm going to present options and say what feels good for you, and then to drive at that.
I think like everything, there's a middle ground, right? There's a moderation to it. On one hand, it's like don't hammer away, and on the other hand, and again, I don't remember who this was. It's funny. It's another YouTube person I saw as a travel photographer. He said, "Don't be a photography sniper. It's not one shot, one kill." Right?
Yeah. But hey, that goes back to Chuck in the very beginning. You said the thing about how you're going to have to be willing to sacrifice certain things to get the shots you want. So that sounds exactly like that.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah. No, exactly. So. That's exactly right, Mike. I mean, for me, like to sacrifice here, I had to run ahead.
Yeah.
And it might not have worked, so like I sacrificed a different shot to get that shot.
You know what's funny? I love the fact that you said you actually stopped looking to other wedding photographers and stuff like that for inspiration or even just following them. Because I know like 2 years ago, man, I used to try to watch, like when we look at videography, all the amazing people out there. And of course you try to copy their styles. And eventually I was just like, you know what? I'm not watching anyone anymore. Like I just want to do what comes naturally to me, which is funny because I don't actually love my style, but my couples do. So it's like, it just happens naturally. And I love that. But I don't know. I just think that's a great path. It kind of takes all the stress out of it. And you don't have to always think, am I living up to this person or this person? And you just find your voice naturally. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And I think, so it goes back to, in the Speakeasy group, there's this, fun thing with me and MagMod, and I don't use MagMod. And
you brought it up. Someone else brought it up in the comments, and I was wondering if you were going to bring it up. I don't know anything about it. I just know something with you and MagMod.
It was actually your buddy Scott. He said ask him what like his favorite MagMod is or something. Yeah.
Scott's great, and he knows that, right? But to that point, right? So, and again, this is not a knock at all on anybody. There's again amazing photography that's happening. I think that sometimes when we use a tool like MagMod, there tends to be a bit of homogeny in the photography, that I don't care how talented the photographer is, somebody who has basic understanding who uses MagMod gear can get that image to be pretty close. So, there's a homogeny where images start to really blend together and look really similar. So that's really at the heart of why I don't typically like to use, I have a MagMod prototype from way back in the day. I still have it. Every once in a while, I'll throw it on if I'm doing some off-camera stuff stylistically. And they're amazing tools.
Right.
And photographers are creating amazing images. It's just not something I want to do. It's not something, because I don't want my images to look like somebody else's images who are using MagMod. So it's a big part of Wow.
I don't know if you knew this though, but the Mag Box was the first softbox ever created.
Yeah, man, and it's the best. No, you know what's funny? What I was going to bring up is I think before hearing you speak on this, some of the comments, and this is something we talk about a lot. It's like before you meet someone, you read their posts in a voice that may actually not be the tone, right, that they type in. And I think maybe a lot of people in the groups, they're seeing that as you're bashing MagMod. But what it sounds like is you're saying, hey, guys, these are just tools. The story and the image is what actually matters, not all this extra stuff you put into it and the tools you used, right? That sounds like
100%. 100%. I mean, some of my best photographer colleagues use MagMod. You know, I'll tell you a story. I got to see MagMod in its developmental stages. I knew Spencer years back. Spencer solicited some input from me on certain things. I'll talk to you guys off air about some things, some interesting stories. So by no means, I bash people tongue in cheek because
of course
we're going to break balls.
It's like me with Nikon
or our fearless.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, some of my best friends are fearless members and win fearless awards. It's just not for me. Right. Yeah. So I
thank God.
I don't, I don't think that, my image, like, you know, I think after doing all this talking, you know, I've kind of talked about how specific I try to be in my images. And I think if I start introducing MagMod, I lose that completely. So I don't know. So no, by no means. I think some amazing work gets churned out by MagMod. It's not something that, it's not a path I really want to go down. I don't think it fits, what I'm trying to say as a photographer.
No, that's amazing. That actually makes a whole lot of sense.
I know a lot of people are really excited about the Q&A. So why don't we do one more of your personal?
I was gonna say let's jump right in. Let's jump into some Q&A.
Yeah, we could jump into Q&A.
Awesome, let's do it.
Hey, remember when 2 hours ago we said that 45 minutes will go really fast?
Yeah, that 2 hours went really fast.
I think I said to one of you guys, you know, I was a high school history teacher for 19 years, so 45 minutes is nothing. Like 45 minutes is just like goes by so quick.
Unless you're the student. I'm like, this class is forever.
So we have a couple, we're like 2 minutes ahead of the people. So guys, we'll tell you right now, start submitting your questions. But before we do that, I wrote down every question people asked as we went through this. So what do you guys think? We just jump right into those?
Hammer away.
Hammer away. All right. So I think the big one was in the beginning, the pre-consultation idea. People wanted to know, do you get to know your clients a lot beforehand? What's your pre-consultation look like, or do you get to know them on the day of? And I think I kind of know the answer to this, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I like people. I like meeting new people. I like hearing their stories and learning about them. And I try to take that. You know, I like good stories in books. I like good stories in movies. Like, you know, in a movie, I'm less about like, you know, the Avengers and more about, let's say, a movie like Sling Blade, where it's just a story, you know, and the story is what makes it great. So I love learning about, you know, stories and people and connections. So that's a big part of what I do. You know, I meet with my clients essentially 2 times before I actually shoot their wedding. Once is, of course, the initial consultation. And then about a month out, we meet live again. And we talk about approach, and we talk about things like being in the room when the bride's getting undressed. And, you know, through that process, we learn a lot. We talk about who's important in their lives. Are there weird situations in your family? Are there, and you really start to learn a lot about the people, if they're introverts or if they're extroverts, or, and you know, it gives me sort of clues as, and I guess that's a page from true documentary photographers, you know, learning about your subjects before you photograph them is going to really help you before you, you know, go and just go in cold and try to figure out who they are, you know? So I try to learn as much as possible about my clients. And I do have some questions on my wedding questionnaire that help me learn more about them, special relationships, you know, things that may happen on this day that I should be aware of, or, you know, things like that. So I try to learn as much as possible beforehand.
Right on. Hey, Tommy, why don't we take us out of the screen share?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's a good idea. Ted, was that funny?
Yeah, I had an inkling that you weren't going to say, oh, I just show up on the day of, and that's when I learn about them. Like, that does not fit your style. Okay, the next one is, have you always been photojournalistic? And if not, did you have like an aha moment where you were like, okay, this seems to be more of something I love?
100%. So I tried everything. I mean, I'll have to link you some of my early work. I like everybody who picks up the camera. When I say I really didn't know what an aperture was, I'm not exaggerating. I learned everything ground up, and I tried everything. First, the biggest thing that I was doing was I was photographing my kids' portraits. And the thing for me, I was fascinated with shallow depth of field. I had the 50 millimeter f1.8, and I loved like how sharp the eye was and how blurry the background was. Like,
oh yeah,
that was awesome, right? So my wife, she's a pretty honest, straight shooter. And after a while, I'm like, hey, hon, look at this shot. I would think it was real good, and she's like, it looks like every other shot you've taken. And I'm like, no, it doesn't, because this is an 85 millimeter and it's much sharper. You don't see that? And she's like, no, like, I can't tell where this was. I don't know anything about what was happening. So I started to get more into storytelling. And, I was a lowly history teacher, not a whole lot of money, young parents, bought the first house and all that stuff. So we would go to Barnes & Noble. That was like a trip for our family. It was like a day out. Like, you take your kid to Barnes & Noble. They had a train table, and the kids would play the train table. And I would go over to the photography section. And one of the first books that like completely opened my eyes about what photography should look like is this little gem. And I couldn't afford it at the time. So it's an American family, 3 decades with the McGarveys. And Pamela Spalding, she's a photojournalist, and what she did is she followed this family for 30 years. And
holy shit,
there's nothing amazing about the images, right? Like, so what she does in the book, let me see if I can find it, like a page. She juxtaposes it, right? So over on this side is like husband and wife. I might be mixing this up here. They take time for each other. And then on the left side, here they are 25 years later. So the book, she juxtaposes them back and forth.
wow.
And when I saw this book, I was like, yes. Like, so I'm coming off the heels of, shooting a bunch of shallow depth of field portraits. And this was so different. Like, everything is in focus, she's an old school film photojournalist. This is an incredible image. Look at the mom in this picture. She's on the phone and she's trying to conduct business, and the kids are talking. And the mom's like, shh, shut your mouth. I'm on the phone. Right. So, it's just an amazing image of everyday life. So this is like a sentimental book of mine. It's funny. So I went to buy this years later, and I went to look it up, and it was 1 penny on Amazon. So I bought this for 1 penny. So
oh, wow.
this was a monumental book for me. So when I would go to Barnes & Noble, I would literally look at this book and say, that's what I want my images to look like. And then one of the first books I bought, so it was that book and Annie Leibowitz's A Photographer's Life. So what I loved about Annie Leibowitz's book was she was just kind of documenting her life. In some really, really amazing images here. Nothing fancy. That's her partner, Susan Satong, them on vacation. And I started to look at images like this and say, and images like the Pamela Spalding book, and say, that's what I want my images to look at. And that was right around 2007. Yeah. So right around that time frame, we talked about that image with my son that shot in the pool. And I thought I had it in here. I don't. I think it's hanging back in its proper spot. But that was the turning point for me where I wanted to tell more stories.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, did you know Annie Leibovitz has a masterclass on Masterclass? Have you ever checked that out?
It's fantastic.
Yes, I haven't. My wife actually bought it for me. She bought it for me for a different purpose. She said, hey, with all your online education, take a look and see what they're doing, and maybe you can take some bits and pieces. So she bought it for me for Christmas. I actually didn't watch it, but I hear it's really good.
Masterclass, I'll tell you, it's like the best produced online learning, at least visually, and the story behind it. It's amazing how they put together those classes. They're all awesome.
Yeah, and her classes talks a lot about photojournalism and how she like started out and all that kind of stuff. And it's a lot about her like why she shoots the way she shoots. Less technical stuff, but it's really, really valuable. Super awesome.
All right, this one. Sorry,
What?
what'd you say, Ted?
I said I see the ad for that thing all the time.
Oh, yeah.
We're all going to see it now because we just said it. And
Yeah, we just put it out there to
Game over.
Amazon. They got us.
Right.
This one, I think this comes back to what we talked about, having your ears be, a tool for you. But someone asked, seems like you have a heightened sense of awareness. Was that something you developed? Was there some kind of light bulb moment where you started, becoming in tune with the stories and the scene?
Great question, and I appreciate that compliment. I think, I don't know if that's natural or not. I think I've honed it over the years, but I think I just always naturally like stories. I naturally like good stories. I naturally gravitate to that. So, I don't know, like, I can't say that I've exercised that. I think that I'm just, that I'm in tune with what I think makes for a good story. And as a result, I'm able to put myself in positions to, capture scenes like that.
For sure.
That question reminded me, this is a really great book that I highly recommend. It's Dan Winter's The Road to Seeing. There's a great quote in here that I want to get it right, so I don't want to bastardize it. So I'm going to try to read it directly. So this is Dan Winter's word. He says here, I should bookmark this time because I refer to this a lot. The world owes a great debt to all those who have, from a state of exceptional awareness, preserved stillness for us to hold. I love that quote. A state of exceptional awareness. He talks about this exceptional awareness. He's basically saying the world owes anybody who captures something in a great way debt, like, for a great job for being exceptionally aware. So I try to take that quote really resonated with me because I do try to be exceptionally aware of what's happening around us. So, I appreciate the compliment and the question. I don't know that I have a great answer for that one. I just feel like it's just part of maybe my makeup.
Yeah. I feel like it probably comes back down to that whole 10,000 hours thing too, right? You do it so often that it's like you just constantly sharpen that skill and becomes muscle memory in a way when you're on a wedding.
Yeah. And again, I can't underestimate the value that, like, 6 or 7 years of shooting with no risk, like absolutely no risk. I didn't have to worry about paying a bill. I didn't have to worry about pleasing a client. I didn't have to worry about anything for 6 or 7 years. So when I roll into my first wedding, I'm pretty confident in what I'm trying to accomplish here, right? And now that I've shot nearly 300 weddings, I at this point, it's like I feel really good about it. The trick is to not let my ego get the best of me and say, I know better than my client. I never know better than my client, right? Like I never know better. I'm always going to listen to them. And I might make some really strong suggestions, but at the end of the day, it's about the client experience. It's not about me at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. All right. I think this one came off the 2-man question. How many images per hour do you usually shoot in a wedding?
So per hour, that's a good question. I don't think I've ever broke down per hour. But I would say I always quote that I deliver around 100 to 150 per hour of coverage. That's what I deliver to a client. But let's say in an 8-hour wedding, as a primary shooter, I'll probably shoot 3,500, 4,000. So I don't know, what does that equal? I don't know.
4,000 a wedding.
A good amount. That equals 4,000 a wedding.
Right. Yeah.
I like that.
You're
All right.
good.
And then this one came up a lot, and this had to do with your explanation of how you tackled that church where you weren't allowed to shoot. Do you know your Enneagram type? A lot of people seem to want to know this because they love your personality.
I don't. And some of the family documentary groups I'm in on, they do that Enneagram test.
Can't you get those at like Walgreens and CVS?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's an enema. That's an enema.
They hurt going in.
Dude, Enneagram tests do hurt because I got my number back and I totally disagree with it. And it might just
and you
prove,
fucking would disagree with it.
It might prove that is my number because I disagree so wholeheartedly with it. And that hurts my brain. And now I'm upset again. Okay.
He tells us a number, we're like, Yeah, no shit.
I know you kind of touched on this, that you don't really follow a lot of wedding photographers, but some people wanted to know, do you have any that you do look up to or like their work? Are there any that stick out to you besides like our friends and things like that?
I learn more from wedding photographers about non-photography
Yeah.
than the images themselves. If I really want to learn about photography, especially when it comes to documentary photography, which is my passion, I look to Joseph Kudelka, I look to Christopher Anderson, Paolo Pellegrin. I look to people who really blow me away with their images. You want to be knocked on your ass. Take a look at Paolo Pellegrin's images. They're documentary images, and it is unbelievable the way that he shoots. I'm inspired by people who take really unique stances, like Trent Park. I have to be real, brutally honest. I really don't look to too many wedding photographers for their photography. I'll mention Scott. Scott, in terms of how he's approaching his branding, and Scott in terms of how he's really active on Instagram, and like I'm learning a ton from that, because that's something I don't want to do that. I hate doing that stuff. I want people to just like my photography, and let's not make a big deal out of this, and let's have a great time, and I'll document your wedding.
What an artist!
What an artist!
Yeah, so I'm amazed at the way that he and Matt really take the reins. Matt Gruber really take the reins, and really push their brand. I get really uncomfortable with that. I like sharing my photography, but I really am uncomfortable with like pushing my brand and pushing who I am. It doesn't. So I learn from wedding photographers. I learn a lot of that stuff from wedding photographers on what it takes to run a successful business.
Makes total sense. Totally. And then one that keeps coming up a lot, which should make you excited, is a lot of people want to know, how can they get in touch with you about your course that you do, your mentorship and all of that?
Yeah. So happy to say that all my current programs right now are all sold out. So I offer 2 different educational offerings in a year's time. And we talked a little bit beforehand about this, and I guess this question was asked, so I'm happy to talk about it. So with a lot of times with when I was just about to leave education, this was in 2017, 2018, I started looking forward, knowing I was going full-time with photography, about streams of income and streams of revenue. And one of the things that I felt like was missing, and this might make people smile, but I'll explain it. One of the things I felt like was missing was quality education. And what I mean by that is I saw a lot of the educational offerings, and quite frankly, a lot of what was being offered is not sound educational practices. A lot of what was being offered was, download my video. Like, first of all, they're being offered by a photographer who's a really skilled photographer. No doubt about the photographer's skill, right? But being able to teach is a very different thing, right? So one of the unique things I felt like that I had was that I was a certified history teacher, history department head, dean of students, teacher coach, and assistant principal, and photographer. So I was a teacher long before I was ever a photographer. So what I did is I wrote the curriculum, just like I wrote curriculum for several classes in my career. As a history teacher, I wrote curriculum for a class called the American Revolution and Civil War. I wrote a class for modern American warfare. I wrote curriculum for my photography classes in high school. So I took all of the principles that make for good education, and I started to flesh them out. And as a result, I created a class called Creating Deeper Documentary Images. That's what the class is called. The drawback is, and Tommy, you talked about this, you looked at my class, and the drawback was that it is live. It is me talking about material. It is you, the student, in the classroom, raising your hand. Well, not raising your hand because we're adults here, but asking questions and having repartee back and forth and having a dialogue and discussing things. So I created an actual class. The other part of that, and this is why I won't ever become rich off of this, is that I wanted it to be small class sizes because I want every student who ever takes one of my classes to feel like they got value from it. So all of my classes are capped at 12. So I will never exceed 12 because that's the maximum that I can handle as a teacher. And I want you, the student, to get value from that. So the class that is sort of my bread and butter, I run it twice a year. It's 12 weeks called Creating Deeper Documentary Images. The last class just ended. It went from January, February, March. So it just ended. And then the next one enrolls in July. The next one will be my 5th run. Every run has sold out in about 24 hours. And then from that, a lot of my students who had that class were like, what's next? We're ready to go. So I developed a year-long mentorship program that's one-on-one, completely customizable. And that has 12 students as well. So that sold out in 24 hours. And we're in the middle of that now. We're like maybe 5 months in on that. So that won't re-enroll until I'll probably look to enroll next November for the year long. And that it'll start like next January.
That's amazing. That's awesome. I love that. I also want to take your course on the American Civil War and all that, because that's fascinating too. So let's get that going as well.
You got it.
We have a question. If you don't have kids, how do you practice without risk in your daily life? Like,
Awesome
what are
question.
some other options?
Yeah, so some of my students who take my class have that. And, it's definitely more challenging. What I would always encourage is, and this is when I taught high school photography, this is what I encouraged them. All of my assignments were always skill-based. They were never subject-based. I never said to my students, go out and take a portrait. Could you imagine being an introvert in a high school class and being told you must go take a portrait? Right. That would be a terrible experience. You would hate photography because you now have to do something you really hate. So all of my assignments are typically skill-based, not subject-based. So what I would encourage to anybody who doesn't have kids at home, who want to get better at this stuff, is to photograph things that you love. I used to say this. I'm like, to my high school photographer, I said, look, if you have this weird obsession that you love cow manure and you want to go out and photograph cow manure, by all means, like, you might be weird, but if you love cow manure, photograph cow manure and be the best cow manure photographer in the world. So whatever it is that you love, right? If it's flowers, you can absolutely practice the elements of composition photographing flowers. If it's street photography, you can 100% practice street photography while utilizing the elements of composition or things like that. So the biggest thing I think would be really just to find out what it is that you love and drive at that. I think that, that's always a great recipe, right? Doing what you love and just working relentlessly at what you love is going to yield great results. It happened with pizza for me, right? I love pizza. I had no clue about how to make a pizza. And I became an obsessive and dove in and tried to make really good pizza and learned from my mistakes. And lo and behold, I can make a pretty decent pizza these days.
Yeah, I love that we came back to pizza.
Always comes back to pizza.
This is awesome, man. I got to tell you, you have me like itching to pick my camera up now. I know we've been on like a hiatus, but like now I want to shoot now. Like,
I'm looking out the window every 5 minutes to see how the light is to be like, okay, can we get off here so I can go photograph my fucking kids?
Yeah, actually, like now I want to shoot now.
I have a question about pizza. So, have you ever made a pizza without flour?
No.
Because that's stupid.
Hey.
I would love to hear your ideas for recipes.
Hey, sometimes, we talked about photos and making choices and what you have to leave behind and what you can't do. When you make a choice to not have carbs, you got to leave behind pizza, all right?
That's not true. My keto pizzas are amazing.
Yeah, have Chuck's pizza and then tell me it's still amazing.
So
I'm not saying it's better.
It'd be really cool to get some ideas from you for ways we can make it better. We use almond flour, mozzarella.
Are we doing this?
Some other things like that. No. So just curious. We can talk about it later, but.
Yeah, my recommendation would be to use flour.
Yeah.
No.
Sorry, buddy. No, listen. I would not say I'm an expert at pizza making. I would just say I do it a lot. So that I'm not somebody to be giving advice about what I can make a really good pizza my way. I would not feel comfortable giving any advice about alternate flours.
Gotcha.
Alternate flowers. That's another course for another person.
Right.
Awesome, dude. Hey, this has been so great.
Awesome, man.
All right, let's talk about where people can find you and where they can find information on your course once it does become available again.
Yeah. So one of the cool things I think that happened accidentally for me is, and this goes back to, I guess, following your passions. You know, long before I ever even wanted to be a photographer or anything like that, I was just taking photos of my kids. That's literally all I was doing. I was the people that everyone hates. I was the dad with the camera, right? Like, I am the mom with the camera that everybody poo-poos and talks down on. I always stick up for that person because that was me. So I was dad with the camera. I was aimless, and I just kept doing it because I liked it. That was it. So what ended up happening was, what I didn't intend is, I started photographing my kids in a documentary way. And nobody was really doing that. I mean, like, nobody at all. So I started the very first online resource called The Family Photojournalist back in 2009. And it took on a kind of a cool life where people were started to do this. They said, hey, this is kind of cool. I'd like to do it. And then I just kind of kept doing my thing. Well, some other photographers made this pretty popular. It became like a genre that I didn't even really know, because I'm kind of, you know, ostrich with the head in the sand, not really paying attention to what everybody else is doing. And I stumbled upon this forum where there's this thriving community of amazing family documentary photographers. So I start posting my work there, and, you know, kind of, they say, like, you find your people, and, you know, just really diving in and being super passionate about that documentary family photography. So it's called, if the family documentary, if you really like it, I'm actually an administrator or a moderator over at one of the large groups. It's called Documentary Family Photographers Worldwide. So if you just type that into Facebook and you join the group, you know, there's some amazing stuff happening. Made some amazing friendships, and they started an education platform there, and that's where my bread and butter course is offered. So if you're interested in that, if you just type in the phrase "creating deeper documentary images," it should, on Google, land you in the very first landing page to my education site. And what it'll do is, it's the current run sold out. We're re-enrolling in July, and that will probably sell out within 24 hours. But we always, if you're interested, message me. Sign up for updates, and then we always solicit that group first. So, you know, we sell like 8 spots before we even announce that it's open for enrollment, 8 out of 12 spots. So yeah, so that's how you find my education offerings. My website is anerinooriginals.com. I'm on Instagram, last name Anerino C. I don't know. That's about it.
Before I share that link with anyone, is it the dfpeducation.com
Yep.
one? Awesome.
Yep. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and it'll outline the course. You'll see it's like a course outline, and, you know, what the course covers and things like that. And obviously, if you have any questions, it's not cheap. It's an investment. So if you have questions, like I said, I grew up in Philadelphia. I'm a working class kid. So anybody who takes my classes, I want them to have value. I want them to get value from it. So I really bend over backwards to make sure that someone gets value out of my class.
Well, I think in 2.5 hours, people learned a ton from you. So I can't imagine what you get out of 12 weeks. Like,
or they fell asleep, man.
No, they didn't. They didn't at all.
Absolutely not. Yeah, this was great. Seriously, thank you so much for the wealth of knowledge you brought on and the awesome photos you showed. Really
cheesesteak recommendations, very important.
Hell yeah.
Yep.
And
thanks for the opportunity, guys.
Let me ask you, just before we sign off, one last thing.
Jesus.
If someone handed you a cheesesteak with lettuce, tomato, and mayonnaise on it, what would you say?
I would say, it depends on who the person is. If it's a
Let's
friend
say
of
it
mine,
was Ted.
Ted and I are kind of close. I'd probably have some ball busting for him, but then the fat guy inside of me would probably eat it.
Yeah,
I would try it.
You got to eat it anyway.
Yeah.
All right, cool. That's the last thing I wanted to know.
Yeah.
That's
the most important question.
This is the first episode we did where you didn't ask him about TikTok.
All right. Do you use TikTok? Say no.
No, I have not. I'm not opposed to it, but I just have not used it.
We got to keep the stream alive.
Didn't need to ask.
Yeah.
All right. This has been amazing, man. I learned so much, and I hope everyone else did.
Awesome.
Sabi yang patingin mo